Good morning, colleagues. Shall we make a start? It is now 10:30. I'd like to welcome members of the public to this meeting of the Council, particularly those watching the live stream on the Council's YouTube channel. I'd also like to welcome officers and those who may be watching and take this opportunity to thank them for their efforts on behalf of the people of Cambridgeshire. The Council supports the principle of transparency and encourages filming, recording and taking photographs at its meetings that are open to the public. Members are advised, therefore, that this meeting may be filmed, recorded or photographed. We are meeting, as you know, at the Burgess Hall at St Ives. This is in order to follow the guidelines we've received from Public Health to manage an indoor meeting of this size during COVID pandemic. Members, you are asked to remain in your seats for the entire meeting, except when speaking, when you are asked to stand. In order to register to speak, you need to raise your hand, and if you happen to have written your name on a piece of paper and it's in your hand, so much the better. For those of you at the back, you are a considerable length of distance away. You will be automatically then added to my list of speakers. If you have a point of order, you'll need to raise your hand and shout, "Chair." This means, as I'm sure you are all aware, that there's been an alleged breach of the Council rules or procedure or law. I will need the member to indicate the rule or law which he or she considers to have been broken, or the personal explanation, which may only relate to some material part of an earlier speech by the member which may appear to have been misunderstood in the present debate. Please can I ask all members to turn their mobile phones to silent or to vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. Councillor Slatter has brought in a box of poppies should anybody wish to avail themselves of that in the break. First item is apologies. I've received apologies from Councillors Derek Giles, Sam Hoy, Steve Tierney, Jonas King, Mandy Smith, Ryan Fuller, Chris Bowden. Councillor Dan Schumann will be late, and I think Councillor French has also sent apologies. And may I take this opportunity on behalf of us all to wish Councillor Giles a swift recovery, and we hope to see him back here in this seat sooner rather than later. The next item is the minutes, is the approval of the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 20th of July 2021. The Council is asked to agree these as a correct record. Do I have a proposer and seconder? Councillor Slatter, thank you. A seconder? Councillor Whelan, thank you. Can I ask any member who does not agree with this proposal to raise their hand now? There being no dissent, I shall proceed to sign the minutes. All in favour? Thank you. Hang on, there's a number of pages, just bear with. Thank you, Mrs. Rowe. I have a number of announcements to make today. On behalf of the Council, I am delighted to welcome our new Director of Highways and Transport, Sue Proctor, who started work on the 1st of November 2021. I'm delighted to report that the Council has won 3 awards at the Chartered Institute of Public Relations East Anglia Awards with Jones Brothers for King's Dyke, which recognises great community involvement in a landmark project. The Council won gold for both construction, property and infrastructure campaign and the integrated campaign, and silver for best publication, the King's Dyke newsletter. I had the pleasure of seeing one of your late colleagues, Councillor Butcher, at Whittlesea last week, and I understand it is going to be called the Ralph Butcher Causeway. So, hurrah. The Council had 2 projects shortlisted for the National Local Government Chronicle Awards 2021. Be Part of the Solution, a campaign delivered by the Communications and Youth Engagement team in partnership with Peterborough and Cambridge City Councils, was shortlisted for Campaign of the Year. Technology-enabled care services, which is part of Cambridgeshire County Council's prevention and early intervention services, was shortlisted in the category of best use of technology and achieved highly commended at the event on the 4th of November. Members will, I have no doubt, wish to note that a new service jointly commissioned by Peterborough City Council, Cambridgeshire County Council and the local clinical commissioning group has launched to support children and young people with their emotional well-being and mental health. The United Service is a partnership including Cambridgeshire and Peterborough NHS Foundation Trust, Cambridgeshire Community Services NHS Trust, Centre 33 and Ormiston Families. Young people have been instrumental in helping co-design the service, which is available to those up to the age of 25 and offers a range of support, including therapies, counselling and guided self-help. Since the last council meeting, I have attended a number of events on behalf of the Chair, including the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation at Feature Space, Godmanchester and Whittlesea Civic Services, the Queen's Green Canopy tree planting ceremonies at Spring Meadow Infant and Nursery School in Ely and St Philip's Church of England Primary School in Cambridge, and last week the official opening of the March Community Centre, at which I was very pleased to see the local members. Finally, I am delighted to be able to present to the previous chairman of the council, Councillor Matt Maguire, with a keepsake book of pictures to thank him for his term as chairman of the council and to serve as a little memory of it. So, Councillor Maguire, if I could ask you just to come up, I shall hand this over, hopefully in a COVID-compliant fashion. There we are. Next is an item on the declarations of interests. Under this item, members are asked to declare interests under the Code of Conduct in any item on the agenda for today's meeting if they are not registered on the Register of Interests. I will pick up the dispensation for all members in relation to agenda item number 7B, the parental leave policy for councillors, when we get to that item. May I have any declarations now, please? There being none, we move on to item number 4, public question time, which allows members of the public to ask questions at the council meeting provided they have given advance notice. The council has received notice of one question, the contents of which have been circulated electronically to all members and published on the council's website. The questioner, Dr. Harold, is unable to attend the meeting today, so I have exercised my discretion to allow the question to be read out by Mrs. Rowe and for Councillor Peter MacDonald, Chair of Highways and Transport, to respond. Mrs. Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. The controversial central section of the East-West Railway will have a significant impact on transport and other plans for the county, which fall under the responsibility of the County Council. I imagine that it is important for you to know about the status of the EWR project. The recent government spending review, SR21, for the next 3 years, see section 4.63, from the Chancellor makes explicit reference to the A428 improvements and to other railways, but there is no mention of the EWR. The East-West Rail Mainline Partnership have questioned why there is no mention of EWR in SR21. England's economic heartland have made a similar statement. As an interested party, please could Cambridgeshire County Council write to the Department of Transport to find out the funding status of the EWR central section and how the lack of commitment in SR21 will affect their plans for it.
Thank you, Mrs. Rowe. Can I ask Councillor MacDonald, please, to respond? You have 2 minutes.
Chair, would you like me to stand?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, Chair, firstly, I'd like to thank Dr. Harold for his question today. I'm sorry I'm speaking with my back to members. And I'd like to thank Dr. Harold for his input to our committee in June, which was very valuable. At our committee in June, we provided our feedback as the County Council on East-West Rail, especially that central section, as part of the non-statutory consultation. East-West Rail is, of course, a national government infrastructure project. We were also surprised to see it was not in the Spending Review 21, as many other national infrastructure projects were. We are members of the East West Rail Mainline Partnership and England's economic heartland. We are therefore contributors to their position. We raised the question with the Department for Transport yesterday, and we will follow up, as Dr. Harold has requested, in writing and feedback to him. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. I'd like to thank Dr. Harold for his question, and we move on to the next item. Item 5 is petitions, and this allows members of the public to present petitions in accordance with the agreed protocol. No petitions were received, so we move on to the next item. This is item number 6, recommendations to full council from the Staffing and Appeals Committee regarding the appointment of a new Chief Executive and Head of Paid Service. As the Staffing and Appeals Committee only met on Friday to interview candidates and make its recommendation to Council, the proposed candidate has not had sufficient time to notify their current employer. I'm therefore going to move this item to the end of the agenda and take it in confidential session. The next item is item 7. This is the report of the Constitution and Ethics Committee. These are recommendations to full council from the Constitution and Ethics Committee. The first report on pages 13 to 38, item A, is proposed changes to the Constitution. As Chair of the Constitution and Ethics Committee, I will move that the recommendations as set out in the report be adopted, and will ask the Vice Chair, Councillor Dr. Boulat, to second. Councillor Boulat? Thank you. Can I start by asking if there are any amendments to the recommendations? There being no amendments, we now move to the debate. So I invite members who wish to make comment on any of the sections on the recommendations from the Constitution and Ethics Committee to indicate if they wish to speak now. Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, there are a number of recommendations in front of us. In general, I wish to support the majority of the recommendations. However, I cannot support the recommendation little 4, which relates to sections 2.45 and 2.46. I believe this is a totally unnecessary amendment. In the preamble, Chairman, which is shown on, I think it's page 20 of the our agenda. I'll just open that page.
Page 18, possibly.
Sorry, page 18, where it refers to the Adults Committee held in December of last year, virtual committee. As it's almost as if this is being presented as a justification. Chairman, with your permission, I'm going to read out, for the benefit of all members, from the minutes of that meeting. The chairwoman explained that Councillor Crawford, who was the Labour representative on Adults Committee, has resigned from the Labour group on Tuesday. She clarified that it was not possible to substitute for someone who was no longer a member of the committee. She explained that the Constitution stated that the Democratic Services Manager needed to be informed of any changes in committee membership no later than 12 noon, 5 clear working days before the meeting. She highlighted that Council had approved a place to the Labour group on Adults Committee. She proposed that standing order be suspended to enable Councillor Linda Jones to represent the Labour group at the meeting. She stated that it was important that the Labour group was represented on the Adults Committee, which covers vital areas of council policy. The motion was seconded by Councillor Ambrose Smith. Chairman, the reason I refer to that is because the chairwoman of that committee did it for totally altruistic reasons. She could see the problems that were presented by the previous member of the Labour group, no longer being. But I would ask you, Chairman, to contrast that with the Highways and Transport meeting on the 27th of July of this year, where it was proposed by Councillor Murphy and seconded by Councillor Milnes that the standing order, and I won't read out the actual order, be suspended to enable Councillor Dupre to act as a substitute for Councillor MacDonald. It was noted that Councillor MacDonald had been required to self-isolate following notification that he had been exposed to COVID-19 by the NHS Test and Trace app, while Councillor Nsinga, who was originally attending as his substitute, had also been required to self-isolate, following a similar notification from the app. Chairman, the reason I've objected to this particular thing is, in the one case, and the one that's referred to in our, on our papers, was done for purely altruistic reasons. I doubt personally, if the positions had been reversed, that we would have seen that actually happen. Nevertheless, what happened at the Highways and Transport meeting was, in my opinion, abuse of power, because there were 4 other substitutes that the chairman of Highways and Transport could have called upon in the absence of Councillor Nsinga to substitute for him. But in fact, what was actually happened was that they used the standing orders and the ability to suspend standing orders simply to shoehorn in another member who was not one of the named substitutes. Therefore, Chairman, I object to what is actually happening, because what they are actually using is actually an attempt to prop up a very fragile administration which feels that it cannot afford to rely on its named substitutes to substitute in this case, but wanted to bring a particular councillor in. And here again, in an emergency, Chairman, if we have this situation in the future where for whatever reason, whether it's health reasons or whatever, and they're unable to get a substitute named and sent, then of course in an emergency, as happened at the Adults Committee back in December of last year, then of course that is the reason why you're able to suspend standing orders, but not simply to sure. So on that basis, Chairman, I think this amendment, this proposal from Constitution is entirely unnecessary. It's been long practice that we give that 5 days notice, and I don't see why we should change it now, Chairman. So I will vote against that. That's little 4. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Maguire. My understanding from the Constitution and Ethics Committee was that this proposal was in order to avoid the consequences either of those 2 events that you've outlined there, Councillor Maguire. Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Dupre.
Thank you, Chair. As I've been name-checked in the previous speaker's speech, I thought I ought to say something, and also as a member of the Constitution and Ethics Committee. I wanted firstly to make the point that there is nothing sacrosanct about 5 days as opposed to any other number of days, but that moving this to a more reasonable 24 hours or 1 day advance notice enables us to make arrangements where people are suddenly indisposed or unavailable because they've been told to self-isolate or so on, which is a feature of the moment and something that happens a lot more than it did before. And this proposal is intended not to circumvent that process, it's intended to make that process unnecessary and to make the whole system more open and transparent, because we will have a rule that simply says you give 24 hours notice, and that should be fine. There's nothing more sacred about 5 days notice than any other number, and I think that this is rather a fuss. Councillor Maguire said that, I think I understand him right, and I'm happy to be corrected if I understood him wrongly, said that he felt that if the shoe had been on the other foot, then the dispensation would not have been granted that was granted to me to substitute at the Highways and Transport Committee. As I recall, and I think I'm correct, Councillor Maguire's group was also 1 member down on that occasion. And I recall that we had a conversation among joint administration members on that committee, which said that, bearing in mind that we were seeking to suspend standing orders to enable our numbers to be put up to strength, if that had happened on the other side and they wished to substitute at short notice, we would have been more than happy to suspend standing orders to enable that, and I'm sure that would have been the case. The aim behind this is to make sure that that sort of event is no longer necessary or is at least minimised.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Chair. So I too will not be supporting this. I think Councillor Maguire gave an excellent job of describing all the reasons why. But the one thing we haven't covered off yet, for those that haven't read their papers in details, is what this rule change it actually refers to in detail. And that is changing a substitute member on a committee, which is traditionally 5 days notice through democratic services, to 24 hours notice. Now, one of the things that we in our group like our substitute members to do is to keep up with the actual role of being a part of that committee, including any training that's available, and keep in touch with that. To shoehorn somebody in at 24 hours notice is not quite the same as somebody that's actually paid attention to what's going on and developed an understanding of that committee. So for that reason, I can't support it. But let's talk about what Councillor Dupre has introduced, something. It's not sacrosanct to have 5 days notice. No, but it does give people the opportunity to read those papers in depth and not suddenly just turn up on the day and be whipped into whatever the administration is saying today, because they haven't had a chance to embed themselves into that paperwork. And where does the 5-day rule come from? It's in the paperwork. It comes from the model rules of governance. So what you're seeking to do today is actually overturn a UK model rule of governance and adjust it to something that is because you're worried that you might not have enough people to attend on the day. So I'm against it on that reason. But when we look at what actually happened in the case of Councillor Anna Bailey as the chair, as Maguire said, it was to assist the Labour group to have representation appropriately at meeting. And the constitution that existed then, which is the constitution in place today, worked. Now, what's being attempted today is something to change something because it's necessary, but nobody has shown us that the constitution hasn't worked, because we've seen an example where it's worked for good reasons. We've also seen an example where it worked for bad reasons. And when I describe that as a bad reason, I think it's a shame, really, that there were four eligible substitutes on that committee, but the joint administration could not trust what they regard as a backbencher to do the role of a quasi-cabinet member. They didn't go to the other people. They said, you know what, the only person appropriate to substitute for me would be somebody from the front row, because you can't be trusted with that. And that's what you're voting for today. Much more of the same. Putting your hand up says, actually, let's leave it all to the front row so they can swap and change at the last moment, because God forbid that they should go to the back row and trust any one of us with a decision. So it's against the model rules of governance. It's being brought forward for the wrong reasons. And worst of all, it's been demonstrated in the past that the Constitution works through the suspension of standing orders. And that works. And you know what? The only people who can suspend standing orders is the joint administration, because we don't have the votes to do it. But you're just complicating things to make a mess out of something that already runs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Count. Councillor Schumann. Oh, Councillor Maguire, did you have a point of order?
Yeah, well, it's an exercise in my right to reply to the point that Councillor Dupre made.
Well, you have a right of personal explanation if you think that she misunderstood you.
I think she did. Well, she didn't just misunderstood me. She misled in my opinion, the council, in that she said, quite rightly, on the day that I'm talking about, the meeting of the July, my side were 2 members down. Technically, could have been 2 members down. I was substituting for Councillor Howell, because I was not a main member on that. I was one of the substitutes, so I was going. And we were one down because we were not able to get another substitute. But we would not, Chairman, have thought, let alone on taking the point that Councillor Counts made of even winning the vote, we would not have even thought to exercise suspension of standing orders, because it was just unfortunate for us that the other councillor who was not able to attend wasn't able to get a substitute. So to suggest that we could have used that is actually misleading this council. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Schumann.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't intend to reiterate or rehearse a lot of the comments which have been made, because
Excellent.
I think they've been eloquently put. However, just to remind Council that the Constitution is not only the process of good governance, but also formed from the common law principles of good administration. And here we are deciding that those common law principles are obviously not relevant to this joint administration. It is a shame that the same member Councillor Dupre, who only a few weeks ago or days ago sat in another administration and said that 3 days' notice for papers was unacceptable, and there is no way a member can contemplate, consider and fully evaluate reports with 3 days' notice. And here we have that same member speaking in favour of changing the Constitution to give a member 1 day in order to try and do the same thing. This is not good governance. This is about gerrymandering the rules in order to make sure that, heaven forbid, if you were a member down, you can still do what you wish as the joint administration by forcing votes through. That's not good administration. When Councillor Count said, you have taken the role of leadership, but that also comes with responsibility and burden, I hope that resonated with some of you, because actually that doesn't mean forcing through votes because you think that's what you want to do. It means making the right decisions at the right time. And we've proven, as an opposition, time and time again, when you present things that are for the good of this authority, for the good of this council, and for the good of the people of Cambridgeshire, we will vote with you. So what are you so frightened of that you have to gerrymander the rules and the constitution today in order to ensure that you always have a majority vote? If you support this joint administration, then it's an absolute indictment of you deciding that you would much rather have the ability to force things through than to do the right thing by trying to alter our constitution today. So I'm not suggesting that the rest of it, these recommendations, need to have a lengthy debate or even an awful lot of consideration. But this point 4, I would request, Chairman, that we don't take the recommendations en bloc, and I would ask you to reconsider this, vote against it today, and think about why we have these 5 days in order to make sure that members can demonstrate good governance and a good understanding of what the matter they'll be considering on the day. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Schumann. Councillor Gough.
Thank you, Chair. Being new to this council, I am looking at this change to the constitution through the lens you talked about in terms of transparency and clarity. And I've heard a number of explanations of different facts and circumstances in different committees which have led to this outcome or the other outcome. And I think that actually leads me to believe that the clarity and simplicity of this rule change is absolutely appropriate. And in this sort of day and age, in the circumstances, the flexibility of substitutions of membership is really important. The other thing I would just point out is that I think that every member in this council has an obligation, and I know they treat that obligation with seriousness, to follow the business of all of the committees in the council. And I'm sure if so substituted into such a position on a committee, they will treat that obligation particularly with seriousness and will be well prepared to participate fully in the meeting. So I will support this recommendation on the basis of transparency and clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gough. Nobody else has indicated that they wish to speak, so what I intend to do is to take 2 votes. The first will only be on item 4, which appears to be the contentious item. So, Mrs. Rowe, are you ready? All of those in favour of Article 4, please raise your hands. All those against, please raise your hands. Fair enough. I think we shall count just for the avoidance of... Thank you. Any abstentions? Mrs. Rowe, the result, please.
Chairman, the results are 31 votes in favour and 20 against and no abstentions. The recommendation is therefore carried.
Thank you. I'm now going to go to a second vote, which is for all of the other items. In other words, the 12 recommendations less number 4. All those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous. Any against? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you very much for that. The second report on page 47 to 52, item B, is parental leave policy for councillors. Can I remind you that in order to avoid the need for each of you to individually declare an interest in the report, the monitoring officer has issued a dispensation relieving all members from the requirement to disclose interests and the restrictions on participating in this debate. As chair of the Constitution and Ethics Committee, I will again move that the recommendations as set out in the report be adopted, and will ask the Vice Chair, Councillor Dr. Boulat, to second.
I second the recommendations.
Thank you very much. Can I start by asking if there are any amendments to the recommendations? That being the case, we will now move to the debate. Councillor Bradnam.
Sorry, I'd just like to point out that there is a strange noise in the hall, and it sounds vaguely like a lute. I just wondered if the sound guys could explore it, because I think it might be interfering with some people's hearing aids, possibly. I'm not quite sure where it's coming from, but perhaps they could explore that. It sounds to me like it's coming from behind Councillor Count, but I don't suppose he's playing the lute.
A lute or a viol, perhaps.
Indeed.
If it was bagpipes, I'd appreciate it.
If I may,
Councillor Count, yep.
I can't hear anything from this end, so I'm guessing that although it appears to be coming from somewhere here, there doesn't seem to be anybody over here that can hear it. So they may.
Thank you for that, Councillor Count. Let's get back to parental leave. Does anybody have any comment? Councillor Beckett.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. Firstly, I want to say thank you for bringing forward this policy. Members in this room do a fantastic job of representing their constituents. But as I look around, it is pretty obvious to me that we're obviously slightly more advanced in age than our average constituent. And this policy does something to try and counter that and to help younger people be more represented in our democracy. I think I'm one of those councillors that has most recently experienced parental leave. Although actually I didn't experience parental leave, because as a self-employed father, there is no parental leave. There is maternity leave, but there is no paternity leave. And all of this goes again to try and make it look like caring for children is a mother's responsibility. It all reminds me of how our society is set up to believe that childcare, and in particular childcare of young children, is a woman's work. While this policy is a good start, it does not go far enough. It states that mothers get 12 times the amount of parental leave as fathers. It states that a woman is expected, therefore, to do 12 times the amount of childcare, and that a father is expected to be 12 times less involved in bringing up a young child. Just think about the implications of that for our society. While being self-employed meant no paternity leave for me, I count myself as incredibly lucky in that I was able to take the financial hit and reduce my work and take a 50-50 role in the bringing up of my daughter at a young age. It was a wonderful time, and forming that early bond was so powerful in our relationship. However, again, it highlights to me just how in the minority I was. When Ada needed her first vaccinations in hospital, nurses insisted on waking my wife, who was taking a well-deserved sleep after her heroic birth, to show her how to care for the wound site, because as a father, I wouldn't know how to do that. When I took my daughter to baby swimming, I eventually had to stop because there was no baby changing for a father. We had to change outside in the corridor because I was the only father. When the list just goes on and on and on as to how many times and how much in our society we seem to think that childcare is a woman's responsibility. If we want true equality in society, I think we need to look at this policy again in the future, and I think we need to look again at how we treat parents in the care and bringing up of our children. If we want true equality, if we want women to be able to go back to work when they choose, if we want men to be able to take on their fair share of childcare, then we need equal parental leave. I implore the Council to revisit this policy in the future and to revisit their general approach to parental leave across the entire Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Beckett. Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair. There seems to be some I very much welcome the introduction of this policy. As previous speaker has said, it's going to be very important in improving the future diversity of the council. As we sit here in the middle of a working day, I think we need to dispense with the notion of politics as a sort of gentleman's hobby, even if perhaps that's how originally and historically it's developed. Now, whilst some MPs are somehow able to combine their role with lucrative outside employment, members will appreciate that the opportunities of such sort are not routinely available to mere councillors. And therefore, councillors of working age, and particularly those with caring responsibilities, will normally need outside employment on top of their councillor work. And they will need suitable leave policies when their family circumstances change. And therefore, for that reason, I think this introduction is very important. I would encourage Constitution Ethics to continue to look further than this. I appreciate we've taken we've built on some of the work done by the LGA and other groups, but I think we've perhaps got an opportunity here to be truly best in class rather than what is offered here, which would correspond to more or less the bare minimum in the kind of outside corporate world. For instance, would the committee please consider taking evidence perhaps from some of our healthcare and childcare professionals about how we genuinely provide the best start for children in life? It's long struck me that the leave provided to birth partners is incredibly short. It's typically 2 weeks. You might think of that as paternity leave, but it could be for someone of another gender. That 2 weeks has always struck me as somewhat ridiculously short when you consider that many birthing women are barely out of hospital after 2 weeks and find it very difficult then to suddenly have the support that they've had taken away at that particularly critical time. And that's just one example where perhaps we start by we adopt the model, we adopt the bare minimum, but I think we could really show other employers around the county what we think would be the best possible start for children and for adoptees in life. And so I'd encourage further work on this and to see what more we can do. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have no other speakers. There seems to be... Oh, sorry. Councillor Dr. Boulat.
Thank you, Chair. I was really delighted as the Vice Chair of Constitution and Ethics Committee to see this policy being discussed and indeed being brought to full council today. As we can see, for many of us in the room, this policy won't affect us directly, but just because something doesn't affect us directly doesn't mean we can't vote to do the right thing. The Independent Remuneration Panel noted in particular the benefits this will have on improving diversity in the council, and I would just like to bring to your attention just a few facts. A local government study from this year revealed that there cannot be gender equality in local councils until at least the year 2077, so after most of our lifetimes. Currently, only 35% of councillors are women, that's across the UK, and there has been a less than 1% increase since 2019 in women councillors. And trust me, if you look at the stats, looking at ethnic minority councillors, people of migrant background, people from the LGBT plus community, the stats are even worse than this. So there's a lot of work to be done on diversity in local government. I think it's a great policy, especially for women and younger people, but not only, as we have heard from the other contributions. I'm glad this includes adoption, paternity leave. I know that more can be done on this as well, and I'm really glad to see that shared parental leave is included as well in the policy. I'll make a point, like a personal point, because I got asked countless times after I got elected in May. Especially, I got questions from young people, from young women, from people of migrant background. How do I get into politics? How do I learn more about politics, and so on? And at one point, I became quite tired attending so many diversity workshops, so many panels where we discussed how can we improve diversity, and we just discussed, have a Zoom conversation, go back and say it's a very interesting conversation and we'll do nothing really about it. And it's not enough for me to tell others around me, well, hard work pays off, or you can just do it, or just believe in yourself, because, the reality is that it's not only about self-motivation, having the initiative, or having a bit of luck in elections. It's actually about having some of the structures in place that actually enable diversity in our councils. So I'm really glad that this kind of policy is adopted in other parts of the UK as well, in the councils with different leaderships, different political parties leading the councils, and I'm really glad that we are discussing this today as well. So that's my contribution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Boulat. Right, Councillor Count.
Thank you, Chair. I hadn't really anticipated getting up during this debate to speak on this subject very much, because I was very much two-minded about where we were going with this. On the one hand, I do really appreciate the fact that we're bringing something forward, and I think it's a very appropriate and very good to not really so much to attract younger people in, because I doubt that you'll go on a doorstep and somebody says, I wanted to be a councillor, but I'm stopped because I'm having a family. But I could be wrong, and I admit that, and I'm fine, so bring something in, and it is recommended in good class. But the bit that I really struggled with was the nature of being a councillor and the nature of the roles we have. For example, leaders have deputies, and it's the deputy's role to step up when the leader isn't there, or deputy of a chair of a committee to step up when the chair isn't there, and that's what they're originally paid for, and the prospect of that, and it can always be arranged, so it could be dealt with. So I'm kind of not in favour for that element, but I've heard some great speeches. One of the other things that concerned me was just how out of touch it was with our own staffing policy. So this is way more generous than the staffing policy that we give our own staff, which sends out the wrong message for me to our staff. So on the one hand, we've got the right message to the public and the councillors going out, but on the other hand, we've got the wrong message to staff. But I wasn't going to say all of that. I was just going to abstain. But the reason I've got up to speak is because of what I've heard so far. And they were excellent speeches. I thought, you know, to get some insight from other people onto what it is to be a new father, for example, and the differences between paternity and maternity leave. You know, I hadn't really thought about it through that lens. And we had a suggestion from the second speaker about this gets revisited for another lens. So I'm loath to move an amendment on the day, Chair. So I'm going to hopefully try and suggest something that will get us to that point without me actually going through the formal attitude of amendment. Is, yeah, I'm going to support this today, so that's where I am personally. We're all different in the Conservative group. We don't whip very often, and God forbid me if I should try it on an issue like this. But yeah, so I'm going to vote in favour of this, but I'm hoping that the Chair would accept that, as he is the Chair of the Constitution and Ethics Committee, to revisit this in up to 1 year's time, forming that working group to look at what could be best practice, but also to incorporate the Staffing and Appeals Committee, because I have to be honest that at the moment it kind of sticks in my craw a little bit that we're giving ourselves, maybe not me, I'm a bit past it, but ourselves, something more generous than we're giving our staff. And so I'd like that incorporated into a review. If you're happy and can nod away to that, Chair, or indicate that that's acceptable, I won't move an amendment, and I'm happy to support this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Count. Yes, I think the issue, as outlined by the speakers, is actually an ongoing one, which would be worthy of review from time to time. And I take the point about staffing. Councillor Shaler.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief comment. I'd like to associate myself with the history that we've been given by Councillor Beckett. I myself was a solo parent to a baby before the age 1, and I recognise all of your comments. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Councillor Machini.
Thank you. I haven't really prepared anything to say, mostly because I wasn't quite sure how the debate was going to go. And I would really like to thank Councillor Count. I think his intervention has been very useful, and I think it's very important. Sorry, blood chair. I think it's very important that we actually consider everybody's points of view. And I would like to offer mine just as a way of clarification. I completely accept that we will have to continue looking at this, and I absolutely want to make sure that we're equitable to everyone, including the staff, and it's something that we absolutely have to look at. From the point of view of an elected member, without adding to anything that my colleagues have said, which is very good indeed, somebody has said we are sitting here in the middle of the working day. So I have a job which I take leave from to be here, which I do because I want to and because I can. Not everybody can. Not everybody has that kind of flexible employer that will allow this kind of thing. I manage my finances using my allowance, which is generous, but once again, I can, and not everybody can. If tomorrow I become pregnant, I genuinely don't know what I would do, as of now. From the moment we pass this vote, at least I know there is a framework, and I will know I can go to someone and explain my situation and set something in place that will make me feel this is not my problem. Because at the moment, if I get pregnant, it is my problem. I have to sort it. I have to find a way. And if I'm not up to it, again, it's my problem. And it's very easy at that point to unravel and say, I can't deal with this, I can't manage this. And then, what do you have to do? Well, if you can't do the job, if you can't do the role, stand down. You know, that is the frame of mind that you would find yourself into. And I think it is absolutely within our equality duty to make sure that people have a framework that they can refer to, so that it doesn't become an automatic, oh my God, I have a problem. Maternity and paternity and parental leave is not a problem. So I would like to thank very much everyone who's open-minded about this debate. I think it's very important. And please accompany us on this journey because it only starts. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have nobody else who has indicated to speak, so there seems to be general consensus in support of the recommendations. If anyone disagrees, could you indicate now, please? Okay, in which case we will move to the vote. So the recommendation is before you. All those in favour, please raise your hands. I think what we're going to do is assume there is a majority in favour, and I'm now going to ask those against to please raise your hands. One. Any abstentions?
That's three.
3 abstentions. Mrs. Rowe, the result is? Small item of mathematics taking place. We shall spare your blushes, Mrs. Rowe.
Chair, I make it 47 votes for, 1 against, 3 abstentions. The recommendation is therefore carried.
Thank you, members. We move on now to item 8, which is the Pension Fund Committee Annual Report included in your council agenda on pages 53 to 61. Can I ask Councillor Alison Whelan, Chair of the Pension Fund Committee, to move receipt of the report? Councillor Whelan.
Thank you, Chair, and may I ask your dispensation to remain seated?
You may. Thank you.
Thank you. The Pension Fund reports annually on their work to full council, and you obviously have the report in the papers for this meeting, so I do not intend to read any of that out. The report primarily refers to the work of the previous committee, and I would like to thank that previous committee for their work, and in particular to the Chair, Terry Rogers. I've rapidly come to understand the surprising amount of work involved in the pension fund, particularly with 60% of the funds now invested in the access pooling arrangements, the investment subcommittees, the investment managers, as well as the committee. The work of the fund employees, the investment advisors and officers was impacted significantly by the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is a credit to them that they have managed to continue with little disruption. The triennial valuation of the pension fund is currently being planned, with valuation date of 31st of March 2022, with results published by 31st of March 2023, and new employer contribution rates effective from the 1st of April 2023. The fund has performed remarkably positively since the March valuation in your report, and now has approaching 90,000 members with a value of over 4 billion. This is an important fund, especially in protecting the income of those members whilst minimising the cost of employers and taxpayers. Finally, I would like to thank officers for the positive assistance and guidance I have received since taking the chair, and I would like to move this report. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Whelan. Any speakers? In which case we will note that report and thank the committee for their work and move on to item 9, which is the Cambridgeshire Local Pension Fund Board annual report, which is included in your council agenda on pages 62 to 84. I will move receipt of this report and ask council's representatives on the board first whether they wish to address the council. Councillors Simon King and Slatter. Do either of you wish to make... Yes, Councillor Slatter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report is the work of many people, officers, councillors and other members of the committees. As a new member of the board, I am in a good position to warmly thank those responsible on behalf of those who benefit from the fund, and particularly my colleague, Councillor King, for the work they have done leading up to this report. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Slatter. Councillor King, did you wish to add anything? Thank you. The item's open for debate. I see no hands, so I shall move on. We note that report. Thank you very much to the committee for their efforts. Item 10 is written motions, and excitingly, 5 motions have been submitted. The first motion has been submitted by Councillor Goldsack. Can I ask Councillor Goldsack to move and speak to his motion as set out? I understand there are a number of issues that Council needs to agree before we proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Yes, I would like to move an amendment as circulated by Officer Michelle Rowe yesterday. A full amendment has been circulated to all members.
It's an alteration, Councillor Goldsack.
I apologise for my words, an alteration, not an amendment.
Thank you. Council, are you happy to accept the alteration as proposed by Councillor Goldsack to his original motion? Agreed. Thank you very much. Councillor Goldsack, if you'd like to proceed, that would be marvellous.
Thank you, Chair. 2 years ago, I was alerted by the lovely Mr and Mrs Pryke, who live on Pratt Street in Soham, to a constant flooding issue to their wonderful Edwardian property. Opposite their home on raised land sits a development that has 3 times been extended. This property fronts the main street that travels through the town of Soham, the old A142. In years that saw heavy rainfall, this property would have sandbags at the ready to stop the puddles of water that resulted on the surface water runoff from their entering into their doorways. Working with Highways Department, we have cleared the gullies. The ditches at the far end of the runoff have been cleared. There are plans to effect changes to the curbs to make those higher to give more protection. But this is not enough. Why? Because we have discovered that the near 2 foot square roadside drains taper down to a 5-inch bore pipework along the 500 metre plus run to the outlying ditches. Under normal and traditional rainfall conditions, this is fine. But as we all know, we no longer have just normal rainfall. Measurements in Soham have included 66 millimetres in 90 minutes. That means that surface water is running out of the nearby estate because their drainage cannot cope, and onto the main street and at a lower point, where the water is gathered in the hope that the drains will remove it. But within seconds of such a deluge, the pipework cannot cope, thus large puddles are formed. I've researched this and found, not to my surprise really, that the wonderfully named Pratt Street in Soham is not unique. This residential street typifies many others within our county that have similar issues to those described. There remains only one solution. We must invest for and act now on surface water runoff to protect homes and property. This motion is just about that. The motion calls on this council to protect homes and property in areas where pipework, often over 60 years of age, was installed to deal with the then rainfall. Failure now to not do so will be letting down every Mr and Mrs Pryke in our county. I've not mentioned the issues seen in March, whereby surface water runoff accesses the foul water drains and causes effluent to rise in the streets level from below. I have not specifically highlighted the misuses of drains in many streets that become blocked with building waste. There was one adjacent to Mr and Mrs Pryke's house in the in the estate opposite her. There was actually full of now dry concrete. It obviously run in there wet and then formed a complete block. I'm asking us to take the surface water seriously and fully commit to addressing the causes and to address the impacts of all such issues across Cambridgeshire, not just my hometown. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goldsack. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Dupre.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to second and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you for that. Do I have any amendments? There being no amendments, the debate is now open. Who'd like to go first? Councillor Ray? Pop your microphone on for me. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Councillor Goldstack for highlighting a very important issue of flooding, and particularly the surface runoff of rainwater. It's an issue which causes immense distress, as he said, to those affected, and which is exacerbated by climate change and the occurrence of heavy rainfall. The effective drainage of rainwater from developed land and highways is of particular importance, and particularly in view of the government's commitment to £27 billion worth of investment in highways. There's an awful lot of land that's going under tarmac. Equally important is the separation of surface water drainage from sewage. If this doesn't happen effectively during heavy rain, it can result in the backup of sewage and in the inundation of houses in the most unpleasant and distressing manner. It also, to avoid that, companies then discharge sewage into rivers, resulting in pollution and damaging of the ecology of those streams. This was an issue that was highlighted in the recent Environment Bill, where finally the government acknowledged that those responsible should have an obligation to prevent the discharge of fluid into streams by the proper installation of separate drainage for rainwater and for sewage. The amendment was taken back to the House of Lords twice, and was finally, the government acknowledged that it was necessary to actually make an obligation on relevant bodies to separate rainwater, albeit when resources permit. So I'm happy to support this motion and for the proper drainage of rainwater into the ditches and rainwater without the inclusion of sewage. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Milnes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to speak about the realistic nature of our council's ability to cope with the likelihood of future flood events. Because I think unless we're careful, although I support Councillor Goldsack's motion and happy to support it, I think we should be realistic. When we see the carving of glaciers falling off the ice flow and the potential impact of the rise of seawater, just a week ago the Cambridge News reported on the likely prospect of flooding by 2030. It covered some 65% or more of Cambridgeshire. The idea that just by repairing or replacing our drainage systems and the culverts that aren't wide enough is not a realistic solution to this problem. And I think we should just be careful that we don't make good sounds in the council meeting, but have no budget available to us to actually deal with this properly. So it feels like we could be accused of being King Canute-like, where Water Beach, instead of a nice place name, becomes an accurate description of the location. Where we're standing here is in that flood map by 2030 of being under the underwater. So I just urge care that our residents expect us to hold back the waters, and especially in light of this week, still COP26 carries on telling us that where the problems are coming from. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Dew.
Thank you, Chair. I thank my colleague for those comments. I think he's slightly missed the point of what I think Councillor Coldsack's trying to do here. I think it's fair to say that there are these, national and international issues that do need to be dealt with. But on a local basis, for example, in the division I represent, there's 2 or 3 villages who have absolutely no river flooding and little chance of it. But what they are having is when there's massive downpours, the drains simply cannot cope. I've said in other meetings, the highways meeting recently, years ago, I remember going to Spain, for example, and wondering why they had these massive concrete dikes. And then, of course, when the heavens opened, you knew exactly why they were there, because it filled up with 10 foot of water in no time and cleared it. We, unfortunately, now have similar rainfall to what I saw in Spain when I was a child on holiday, insofar as we have massive deluges. And as has been said, we've got, 2 foot pipes, gullies leading down into 5-inch pipes, which are just not clearing the water. So most of the flooding that I'm getting in the villages that I represent is where the drains are simply not clearing. So the water's coming down, there's localised flooding, it eventually clears. But so I think what we're trying to do is, the message we're trying to send is, we're not going to solve all the flooding issues in one effort, and I think we should be working towards the other. So I totally agree with my colleague there. But what we can do is those things that we can influence, like making sure that local gullies, even if they're not immediately upgraded, which they need to be in all honesty, but are actually kept clear. I was out with a highways officer only last week who was extremely generous in his time and came out in the weekend with me to have a walk around. And he was saying one of the problems that's happening on a regular basis is the actual pots that drain down are cleared, and very often there's blockages between the pipes, so you're still not clearing it. So I think what Councillor Goldsack has brought forward today is actually saying we look at those things we can control, which is the highways drainage, not ignore the other parts, which I totally agree with you, we do need to come back to. And we send a message out, this is not the answer to everything, but to the people who live on the end of Hemmingford Road and High Street in Hemmingford Grey, who literally had the road outside couldn't cope with the drainage. It all came up to where, in past years, the village pond was, because of course we've got all those things to deal with from the past, and totally flooded their house. There was then the feedback that one of the councillors, I can't remember which one, had mentioned, where the foul water had got into the system as well. They ended up with not only the water that we'd brought up, and the foul water joined it. So I think it's hugely important not to broke disappointment, i.e. saying this is going to cure it all, but be realistic. And what we're saying is to say it's a very small step on a big journey, but at least it's a step in the right direction. So I, for one, will be supporting Councillor Goldsack. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to add my comments to Councillor Goldsack's. I represent St Neots, which since August 2019 has experienced 3 major flooding incidents, with 3 or 4 less serious but still very severe flooding incidents on top of that. Several of my residents have been flooded out of their homes multiple times and now live in fear of every rainstorm and the prospect of rainwater and sewage entering their homes. This year, the County Council has done a great job of cleaning drains and gullies, many of which had not been cleaned for more than 5 years under the previous administration. But however, as Councillor Goldsack observes, recently clean gullies often reveal problems with the subsurface infrastructure, which was not designed to cope with the frequency and volume of rainwater we're experiencing as part of the climate emergency. Fixing this infrastructure, I think, is a matter of extreme importance. I understand what we're saying about the climate emergency, and we have to move forward with adaptation as well as mitigation. But I think from surface water flooding, no resident should have to live in fear of the weather forecast. So I support this motion and thank Councillor Goldsack for moving it.
Thank you for that, Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Bywater.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I echo a lot of the comments that have already been made, and I represent a ward of Sawtrey. We are nowhere near a river. We've had extensive flooding in the village and also in Glatton and Woodwalton that are also not near rivers, and this is all to do with surface water flood-off. I'm an investigator by profession. I like looking into things and exploring things, and one of the things that I found in my investigations was the last time that Sawtrey had an inquiry into its drainage. It's dated 1850, so I'll leave it to your imagination on where the pipes are and who understands where the pipe works are under the roads and residents' properties in Sawtrey. I welcome this. I really welcome this motion. I support it fully, and I hope that you as colleagues will all have the same issues within your own wards and will support it too. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Councillor Count.
Thank you, Chair. I want to start off by thanking Councillor Goldsack for his motion to try and help alleviate the impact of surface water flooding. I'd also like to thank the officers that are currently involved in working in this area. They have an awful lot to do with quite a small team, quite a small budget. But I would remind members that one of the things that the Conservative administration did in the last budget was increase it for flood resilience, which was voted against by the opposition, all the parties present here today, and that included extra money for clearing the drains, extra money for grip cutting, which is vital, that we referred to earlier. So it's no wonder that there have been more gullies cleared this year, because the Conservatives put their money in for that purpose, and you are spending what you voted against. So I just thought I'd ought to raise that one. But the one thing the one speech that's kind of stuck in my craw a little bit was the give up before you start attitude. All right, we can't solve the world, we can't change the world in a day, but we have a responsibility, and we need to deal with our responsibilities and get on top of these things. We can't kick everything into the long cast, and we can't simply turn around to our residents and say, this is too big a problem for us to deal with, so we're going to kind of walk away. Of course, it wouldn't really matter for my hometown of March, because some of the administration want to re-wet the fence. That will get rid of that problem anyway, as we'll all be underwater. But we'll come on to that later on in the debate on another subject. But I would like to point out that March, if you look at the response to the written questions on today's agenda, I actually submitted a map that was drawn up by Anglian Water of where the foul water is connected to the highway surface is connected to foul water. And that entire map is covered in red. It's not a bit here and there. Look at the written questions. That is the situation in March. March was picked out for this particular project. It's the first of its kind. I believe it's the only one in the area that's now been mapped this way because of the extensive flooding we have in March that is due to surface water runoff, a lot of it. There are other reasons as well. And this will probably get done in other areas as well, so we'll see the extent of the problem. And whilst we are a lead authority, which involves convening all of the other partners to deal with flooding, there is a surface water requirement. That's our responsibility. And that is not something that we can prevaricate about or go against or delay for another day. So this motion, which talks about small bore pipes, is very relevant to that. The other thing that's relevant to this is climate change. And we've heard a lot about our role in climate change, and we've heard a lot about what the effects will be if we don't deal with it. So it's very disappointing that the people talking about it are members of the Joint Administration that only a week or so ago elected to put up to 5,000 tonnes of CO2e into the atmosphere when a viable, cheap green alternative at £53.65 a tonne was put in front of them. And that's really sad to see, but it's say one thing and do another. The only other point I would make at this point in time, apart from welcoming the overall motion, is, yeah, I'm going to fight for March. All right, I'm going to fight for March, whether I'm the leader of this council or just about, somebody not even on the council anymore, because I believe passionately that a lot of action needs to be done there. But I do also hear that it is the same in a lot of other areas. So we do need to do more in this area. We've absolutely got to get on top of this. And it cannot just be on the back burner. Surface water flooding is a county council responsibility. As a lead authority, we convene the others. But surface water flooding is down to us. So when the homes flood through surface water, we can't look around at other people and say, you didn't do this or you didn't do that, which has been the case in March for many, many years. One thing that has particularly galled me before the advent of this map is the amount of times that we have been flooded and we have been told there is no sewage on your streets, there is nothing to see here. And that has been the definitive answer up until this map has been produced. If you look at the map now, you know that the evidence given by my residents and this map proves that that answer was impossible. We did see sewage on the streets, and we don't want to see it again. So I appreciate this motion. Excellent motion, Mark. Thank you for bringing it forward.
Thank you, Councillor Count. Obviously, members, this is a subject to finish up. Councillor Dupre.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I very much welcome this motion and the opportunity to have this debate. There have been some very positive contributions to the debate this morning, and I particularly want to thank Councillors Ray, Milnes, Dew, Ferguson and Bywater for their very positive speeches and statements and explanations of the impact in their area. I have had a prolonged but I think fruitful exchange over the last few days with Councillor Goldsack about this motion, and I'm grateful to him for engaging in that to the point where we can bring something which I think will have the majority of this council voting in favour of it. I very much hope that that will be the position. Domestic flooding is an absolutely devastating event, and it's happening with increasing frequency. Indeed, as I was preparing to speak yesterday, preparing for today's debate, I was contacted by a resident in my own division whose house has spent 6 months being dried out after the last inundation by surface water, with neighbouring unmaintained ditches, runoff from fields and so on. It is absolutely devastating, and it's happening far too often, and will happen more. This motion identifies 3 of the reasons for this: the effects of climate change, the loss of green spaces to retain surface water, and ageing or inadequate infrastructure. During this calendar year, the Council, as lead local flood authority, has been publishing its Section 19 reports into the flood events of winter 2020, area by area, and more of these reports are on their way. At the same time, the Council is updating the local flood risk management strategy for Cambridgeshire. The overall objectives of the strategy will remain the same: understanding flood risk in Cambridgeshire, managing the likelihood of flooding, helping Cambridgeshire's citizens to manage their own risk, ensuring appropriate development in Cambridgeshire, and improving flood prediction, warning and post-flood recovery. The updated document will now see climate change integrated throughout. It will reflect changed policy and legislative drivers, as well as the increased importance of working together with our partners. Greater clarity about roles and responsibilities will be one of the key learnings from the winter 2020 floods. The draft local flood risk management strategy is now online in preparation for next week's meeting of the committee. It will be discussed by the Environment and Green Investment Committee on Thursday next week, where I will be asking members to approve it as a basis for public consultation. This will offer opportunities to consider the strategy, including the section on surface water and the local projects identified in the strategy's associated action plan. During our spokes meetings in preparation for next week's meeting, Councillor Goldsack a little while ago expressed concern about the extent to which surface water was addressed in that strategy, and the latest version of that does take that point very much on board, but there will be plenty more opportunities to discuss that and other issues. So with the area-based Section 19 reports, the county-wide strategy and analysis of localised areas of persistent flooding, we will be able to identify and cost up potential solutions. Meanwhile, our highways and local lead flood authority officers work with a range of agencies, including district council planners, internal drainage boards and water companies, to analyse flood risk and prepare drainage strategies. Officers are currently reviewing our housing estate road construction specification in the light of climate change. The Council's community flood programme is well underway. The Floodmobile is reaching local communities, including Alconbury and St Neots, and shortly, if not already happened, St Ives. I think that's coming soon. And flooding is high on the Council and the public's agenda. I'm very pleased that we've been able to agree a motion to put to this Council cross-party on the importance of this work. I'm delighted to second this motion, and I would encourage members to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. Councillor Goldsack.
Chair, you'll be very pleased to know I tend to be brief, but I'd like to speak to every member in the room. We get phone calls, we get emails, we get stopped in the streets as the local representatives.
and we're asked, can you help me? Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Pryke living on Pratt Street did exactly that. Can you help me? I actually believe it was a Facebook Messenger original contact. Okay, but I know Stephanie and Richard, and I've known Stephanie and Richard for a long while. And actually, that help me has been a voyage of discovery. And if you go along these voyages of discovery, when people ask you to help, and you go out and you see the people, and you listen to what's being said, it opens up a whole world of understanding. Every day is a learning day. I have learned that 5-inch bore pipe isn't good when heavy rainwater has come down. I didn't know that 6 months ago, but I've learnt it now. And I've learnt that we can do something about it. So I'm absolutely delighted that we've got a commitment to doing something about it. Similarly, I live in a small fenland village of Isleham, and I've had a client ask me, a member of the community asked me to go out and see her, and I went to see her, and she had just moved there from Walthamstow to a small fenland village and wanted me to do something about the noisy tractors that kept going past her door. That's not quite so easy, but we get them all the while, and we have to look to find a way to be. So all I'm saying is the good motion, which I believe we're going to get great support for here today, has shown this is not political. This is for the good people of Cambridge, and this is exactly what we should be looking to do every minute of our day as elected officers, elected members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Goldsack. Wise words. I have noted a general consensus in support of this motion. If anybody disagrees, please indicate now. In which case, I see no objections, so we will take the motion as carried. Thank you very much. The next motion is that submitted by Councillor Sanderson, item 10B. Can I ask Councillor Sanderson to move and speak to his motion as set out on pages 4 to 5 of the Council agenda? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm pleased to present this motion to Council today. We've all seen the harrowing images of Afghan citizens attempting to flee their own country in fear of their own safety, as well as that of their own families, following the Taliban's takeover of that country. Many of the people fearful for their own lives have worked tirelessly and loyally for many years alongside our own armed forces, as well as our NATO allies.
Councillor Sanderson, can I ask you perhaps just to lift your microphone so it's slightly closer to you?
Will do, thank you.
Sorry, it's a bit of a distraction for you, I realise, but
that's right,
it's hard to hear at the back. Yep,
right,
getting your thumbs up now.
I'll multitask. Yes, sorry about that, Chairman. Yes, I'll stop being so tall. Many of the people fearful for their own lives have worked tirelessly and loyally for many years alongside our own armed forces, as well as our NATO allies, protecting their communities from violence and tyranny. They served as translators and interpreters on the front line, as well as carrying out a wide range of support roles, and they now find themselves and their families at significant risk of harm. Many others who have already fled their homes are in danger for other reasons, their gender, religion or sexuality, for example, or because of their political beliefs. These are circumstances and freedoms that we take for granted in this country, but for many Afghan citizens, they are the very characteristics that might make the difference between life and death. Although many thousands of Afghan nationals were able to escape before the exit routes were closed, we know that there are still many more that need to flee, and we hope that they can be supported to do so very soon. Colleagues today will be aware that several thousand Afghan nationals have already been welcomed in the UK, but the speed at which the operation to evacuate people from Afghanistan was such that a huge number are still accommodated in temporary housing and in hotels. Cambridgeshire is a welcoming, compassionate and caring county, and this council has a positive track record of supporting our residents and providing them with opportunities to thrive and succeed, regardless of their background and circumstances. Now more than ever, we need to step forward as a council and as a society, offering a hopeful and positive future to our newly arrived Afghan citizens. And this motion sets out a raft of measures which we must take to play our part. We've already worked closely alongside our district and city council partners who are leading the work to identify suitable housing. But there is still so much more that we can do and must do to help our newest residents settle. We need to help them to integrate and achieve in their new home and their new country as much as possible. We want our officers to have a shared understanding of the plight of our newest residents and the terror they have fled from. We want our adult skills service to support those that are able to work to take up employment as quickly as possible. We want people who need extra support from social care to be able to get the help they need right first time. And we want to tell the stories of our Afghan residents through their arts, culture and heritage. So I urge fellow councillors today to support this motion and do what's right and proper for those who have sacrificed so much for freedom and justice. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cox-Gondon.
Yes, and I reserve my right to it for a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any amendments? No, in which case we open this for debate. Who'd like to go first? Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't doubt for 1 minute that this council, like as with, oh sorry.
Just speak into it.
I'll speak into it, but I hope you're not going to ask me to lift it up.
Hunch yourself over, Councillor Maguire.
Oh, hunch. On a hunch, Chairman.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't doubt that we, like the previous item, this will have total acclaim from this council. I mean, we all support this in supporting this motion. However, I was just wanted, as Councillor Sanders said, you know, we are both we are a compassionate council, and I hope we will be able to provide some sort of succour to these refugees. But I just wondered if he's able to tell us in his research, and I've no doubt he researched this subject quite good, how many Afghan refugees, people affected by this the tragedy, the most recent tragedy in Afghanistan, if he's able to tell us how many refugees are already within Cambridgeshire being housed, being accommodated somehow, and whether it's county as a whole or even within his own district. Because ultimately it will be the districts who will probably be mainly responsible for housing. So, as I say, I think it would be of interest to this whole council to know where we fit into the overall picture as far as the UK is concerned. I don't mind if that comes during his summing up, Chairman.
I think that would be the appropriate place, Councillor Maguire. Thank you. Councillor Schumann.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be very brief just to say I welcome this motion as well from Councillor Sanderson. Less than 24 hours ago, we had on the news the tragic quote that the situation in Afghanistan is hell on earth, and a clear message from all of our members today to say that we welcome with open arms and open hearts any refugees to Cambridgeshire. And I wish to place on record the incredible work that Adrian Chapman, one of our officers, and his team do in ensuring that we are best prepared to have those open arms and open hearts to those that need it most. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Schumann, thank you for that. Councillor Dr. Bulap.
Thank you, Chair. I will try to bring the microphone a bit closer this time. Yes, there's a lot to say on this topic, and well done for a really, really substantive motion with a lot of very good and practical points. First of all, I would like to just say thank you to the work that has already been done across the county by many districts and Cambridge City Council as well. So authorities are already working on this very hard to resettle some of the refugees. I would also like to say thank you to our charity and voluntary sector. They often don't get mentioned, but we shouldn't underestimate the key role that the voluntary and charity sector does play on this issue in the efforts to resettle Afghan nationals in the UK. And unfortunately, I speak to quite many advisors, people, volunteers in the sector, and many are saying that they're really at capacity now. They're spending long hours in the evenings, in the weekends, working in this joint effort. So they should be supported as well, and their efforts should be recognized. Now, there's a point about housing that was made in the motion, and suitable housing is really key to integration and people actually feeling welcome in our county. I have to say it's quite concerning when I have seen some of the national news about not in our area, but in different parts of the country, actually some of the accommodation not being really suitable. So I think it's really important we make all the efforts we can for the short-term and the longer-term accommodation to be suitable, because some of the situations across the UK have been quite worrying to see on the national level. And to be able to respond to this challenge of resettling Afghan nationals, we need to consider this into the wider context of our housing provision, of what needs to be built, how sustainable it is, and we cannot leave people wherever they come from really in limbo for months over housing or over their immigration status. So this is all kind of local level work, but within the national level picture that we do need to recognize. One other point I would like to make is that I particularly welcome the point in this motion about training frontline officers and managers. I think it's so important that all of us, people who work directly with asylum seekers and refugees in general, and in the situation with Afghan nationals, know the context of the situation. Many of us learned from news, from conversations with our residents, with officers, but it's so important to have training on this so we don't fall into the trap of various myths circulating about asylum seekers and refugees at the moment. Final point on employment. Employment can actually be quite challenging. I really welcome the points on finding employment, but I have to note that while some of the Afghan nationals will receive what's called indefinite leave to remain, which means they will be free of any immigration restrictions, there will be others, and asylum seekers, refugees in general, who are quite in precarious employment circumstances. And again, that's something that unfortunately we can't change locally, but we have to see it in the national context of the Home Office's policy. They have a policy on permission to work for asylum seekers, and not all are allowed to work, so it really depends on the category, on their history, on like various. The immigration system is really complex in the UK. So while this is something that I do recognize we cannot change as the council, I wonder if we can do something about actually as a council, as people who have experience at the local level, actually entering this debate on asylum seekers and the right to work in the UK more broadly. And I know people at the national level are doing some work on this. So I'll end with 4 words because there's a lot to say on this issue, with 4 words which I took from what's called the Firm Immigration Charter. It's a document online which actually sets out what should be our values around immigration and asylum in the UK. And they have 4 words at the core of this, which are dignity, justice, welcome, and action. And I hope at least on the latter, on the word of action, we can do something in this council with this motion. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have no other... Councillor Shaler.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to speak quite briefly, actually, about the benefits that our newest neighbours bring, their skills, knowledge, experience, stories and perspectives. As a nation, we have a proud history of being in the forefront of human progress and also being an inclusive and open nation. These are related. Immigrants bring new perspectives, options and insights. And these are the raw materials of progress. I therefore wish to express my desire that our new arrivals not only have support, but feel valued as members of our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Councillor Cox-Condren, you reserved your right to speak. Would you like to speak now?
Thank you. Is that okay like that? Yep.
Well done.
Great. Refugees are welcome here. Our hostile environment and the rhetoric of hate that we often hear being pushed has a negative effect on us all. Very obviously on refugees arriving here, fleeing violence and persecution, but also, for example, on the Windrush generation and the generations that followed, who were invited to Britain, who were asked to leave their homes to come here and help shape our NHS and rebuild our country. And on every one of us, whether we identify as being a migrant or not, hatred breaks us and it weakens us, when more than ever we need tolerance, humanity and strength. As we have demonstrated in communities everywhere during the pandemic, that is who we are. We all recognise, I think, the importance of place building and identity for the benefit of our health and well-being, community building, for democracy and to thrive. Part of Britishness is that we have a proud history of welcoming refugees seeking protection from persecution and from the effects of climate change, and offering a warm welcome. That is such an important and integral part of our identity. Right now, in the same year that it's the 70th anniversary of the UK signing the UN Refugee Convention, the government are talking about trying to push through a nationality and borders bill, criminalising people seeking asylum, having devastating impact on men, women and children who desperately need our protection. So right now our actions, working together in partnership, as you say, with our officers, with councils, organisations and residents across the county to support refugee resettlement are absolutely vital. But so are our voices in changing this narrative and stating clearly that refugees are welcome here. Tom mentioned the work of our libraries and Library Presents and what they're doing and the important role that they play in being civic places of sanctuary, of education, information for us all and of sharing. Cambridgeshire storyteller and refugee support campaigner, activist and worker Glenys Newton once told me that an enemy is just someone whose story you have not yet heard. Our own Wisbeachian, the abolitionist Thomas Clarkson, pioneered activism and social justice through gathering and sharing stories, gathering and sharing voices and storytelling and evoking empathy. Our stories, as Glenys says, are the bedrock of humanity. They are what makes us intrinsically human. Sharing our stories is revolutionary. Both sharing stories and truly listening, through the books and gatherings in our libraries, in schools, through the arts, music, food, culture and museums, in cafes and community centres and on the streets. And right now, us all supporting this motion is part of that story, part of our identity and strength, as we all say loudly and clearly, welcome.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sanderson, to sum up.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Excellent contributions from everyone just now. I'm very appreciative of all the contributions that members have made. Response to Councillor Maguire's query, we only have around a dozen families in the whole of Cambridgeshire at the moment from Afghanistan here as refugees. And as you correctly pointed out, it's the role of the district and the city councils to match them to housing and obviously communicate with the Home Office. But I have to say, I think all of them have been very good. What they've done, there have been some bumps in the road, but we've worked very closely with them to help achieve a way forward. I think Councillor Schumann summed it up very well when he said Afghanistan has basically been hell on earth. I think that is correct. Almost unthinkable for the people for people like ourselves who are in a very fortunate position. And I'd like to also echo his praise for Adrian Chapman and his staff. They've been absolutely fantastic, as they always are. Councillor Burat, the 4 words that she used were excellent, but I think action being the most important one. And I think we're showing that today by hopefully supporting this motion. Councillor Cox-Condren, as always, showed her understanding of the needs of people who are less fortunate than ourselves and put it very eloquently, as she always does. And I'm proud today that we've shown just how compassionate we are as a county council, and all members, regardless of their political persuasion, have shown that today. So I'm happy to propose this motion, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. There seems to be general consensus in support of this motion. If anyone disagrees, could you raise your hand now, please? Are there any abstentions? In which case, I think we can assume that motion is carried. So thank you very much.
Chair, I wonder if I may beg your leave, please, to I will stand up. I apologise. I'm looking around me and I'm seeing people with far less padding on than I have, with coats wrapped around their knees, etc., etc. We're all very, very cold out here. I wonder if now might be at least a good time to take a break and allow people to move around.
Press on for Councillor Howitt's motion and then hope that we can achieve consensus on that as well. But thank you, Councillor Goldsack. You're quite right. I think everyone is feeling somewhat arctic. So that concludes discussion of the second motion. We now move to the third motion submitted by Councillor Howitt. Can I ask Councillor Howitt to move and speak to his motion as set out on pages 5 to 7 of the Council agenda? Councillor Howitt.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
So far.
Chair, the government promised to fix the crisis in social care, and in this motion our county council will say it has failed to do so. and that this isn't just a political failure, it's an abject failure most of all for those vulnerable in our society who need social care. For us in Cambridgeshire, the number of people over 85 who most need social care has doubled in the last 5 years and will double again. Age Concern says that 1 in 7 have their care needs unmet. That's 24,000 people in our county who need our help, but whose needs we cannot today answer. Not one of those people will receive extra help in the government announcement. Instead, as the Alzheimer's Society has said, the announcement will only mean more rationing of services. Our motion does acknowledge the need for a cap on care costs, which the government has shamefully waited 10 years to propose since the original Dill Not proposals. But for those people who fund their own care, that promise has also been broken. Like 74-year-old Steve Acklam from Camborne, who spent 10 years looking after his wife as her dementia grew worse and worse, and is now forced to pay £4,000 per month as it eventually became impossible for him to cope, and she is now forced into residential care. For Steve, the announcement is not retrospective. So for him and for thousands of others, it does not end the fear of having to sell their home to pay for care. And Steve understands that the cap on care costs is on care costs, but it's not on accommodation. And providers will simply be forced to switch charges onto so-called hotel costs, which mean for the family, there is no protection at all. For those private care providers who are partners in delivering care in Cambridgeshire, the government provides no respite either. For some already, it is seeing the grim prospect of having to hand contracts back to our authority because they cannot afford to continue to provide the service. Their national head is warning of, quote, serious and far-reaching consequences from the failure of the government announcement. And for care workers themselves, I can confirm the stories of people leaving their jobs in droves to get better paid work, including by delivering Amazon parcels. For our valuable care workers and for our care providers, it is the slap in the face that the method chosen to fund the health and social care levy, national insurance, leaves them having to pay extra for their own jobs. The Jam Tomorrow promise that extra money going to the NHS now will be transferred to social care in 3 years' time, no one believes. A sustainable health service needs a sustainable care system. They are not alternatives. Indeed, the consequence of this government announcement is that extra costs which are being put on care providers and on staff fall on our authority, Cambridgeshire County Council too. The extra assessments, the equalisation of fees, our own additional costs as an employer, all mean that the government announcement, instead of benefiting Cambridgeshire, will only add around £1 million to our costs. And what does the government white paper say about meeting growing need for care? Add it to the council tax. I invite the Conservative opposition to vote for this resolution, telling their own government to find an alternative which will genuinely fix social care. Like the Conservative chair of the Local Government Association, put on record your disappointment in the government announcement and your recognition that the funding announced does not allow councils to meet the current pressures for social care, let alone those of the future. For the parties of the joint administration, we will continue to support our officers to provide the very best social care services to the people of Cambridgeshire that we can, and to be open and honest with local people about our challenges in doing so. This motion upholds that commitment. Our commitment is to reform the commissioning system to put people and their local communities first, to treat our service users as rights holders, to prevent people having to go into hospital, not just deal with the consequences when they do so, to affirm that directly provided services as well as private provision have their role to play, to seek to offer care workers the pay and training which they deserve, to offer respect and dignity to all who need and who provide our care.
Councillor Howard, you're out of time, I'm afraid.
Thank you. One more sentence. This government proposal does none of that, and that's why we must vote to reject it today.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Dr van der Ven.
Yes.
Do you wish to reserve your right to speak?
I'll speak now.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Sorry that I can't see people in the back. I'd like to start by thanking all of those who work in social care in Cambridgeshire. The proposed social care reforms sadly fail to address deep-rooted structural problems in our care system, which today stands in grave danger. Even since Councillor Howitt drafted this motion, we've seen social care provision erode to a very worrying degree. I'd like to talk in particular about workforce issues. As Jeremy Hunt himself has argued, without a workforce there can be no reforms. We can cite various reasons for the dire state of social care here in Cambridgeshire. The pandemic, of course, the virus itself, but also decisions to put carers and those cared for in more dangerous situations, particularly the discharge of COVID patients into care homes. Brexit, which has made it so much harder to recruit into the care profession, as this Council's Health Scrutiny Committee examined over several years. But perhaps the most important structural problem is the long-standing fragility of the profession itself, with or without Brexit or the pandemic. Low pay, low esteem, and some might argue a disregard and even contempt for what at the end of the day can only be described as a noble profession, care of vulnerable people. One could also cite this Council's decision in recent years, knowingly making its own financial situation even worse, leaving it less able to invest in critical prevention. And those are issues specifically addressed in this administration's joint agreement. The consequences of the government's decision to make vaccinations mandatory for care workers but not other workers comes to a head this week and further contributes to the driving away of people from the care profession altogether. Indeed, care workers are leaving to such an extent that care providers are ringing up the council to hand back care packages. What will happen to those vulnerable people who need to get up in the morning with help, who need help to eat, to drink, to be bathed, to be turned over in their bed, and all of the other basic things that need to happen in a person's day? The proposed reforms place an expectation on local authorities to deal with a vastly growing social care need, but offer few clues as to the adequate funding structures to make this happen. And reforms are further undermined by the priority of dealing with the NHS COVID backlog, which, as we know, is vast. Unfortunately, mixed messages from government on public health protection measures have eroded public trust in authority and facilitated the spread of COVID-19 itself, further stretching and ultimately undermining the NHS, now at breaking point, as so graphically set out in our local press. In the words of its CEO, Adam Brooks is seeking to function as a hospital. And so the national insurance contributions to help fund the reforms will be paid by those least able to afford it and swallowed up by the endless COVID backlog. The proposals are called Build Back Better. This is a borrowed slogan. Unfortunately, behind it, there is still no viable, sustainable structure for fixing social care. Let's hope that the debates and arguments at this critical time, which come from across the political spectrum, are heard and that the bill is adjusted to meet the task. I'm very sorry that colleagues have seen it necessary to leave the room on this really important subject. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Do I have any amendments? That being the case, we now move to the debate. Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me all right?
So far?
Yeah. Really, social care is a very important thing, as we all know. I have dealings with residents who are absolutely on their knees. You've got the carer looking after a husband or vice versa, and they just don't know what to do anymore. They're on the breadline. There's no respite for them. What do? Do we just leave these people laying on the floor for hours on end? The carer actually, the wife or husband, walks out because they're so desperate. Something's got to be done. This government needs to do something. It's going to get worse. Every day we all hear stories, I'm sure we do. So I would ask that this government do something about it. Give us some money. We've got the Conservatives here. I'm sure there's money in their pot that they can give to every council that needs it. Because people are going to die because they're not getting the care. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bird. I saw a hand go up. Councillor Howell, was it you? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Very observant of you. Well done. Just want to correct a couple of things that were said initially, that this has been something that the Conservative government hasn't done for the last 10 years. It was actually Tony Blair back in '97 that said that we would be fixing the health and care service, social care service. He didn't do it. The combined might of the Conservatives and the Lib Dem from 2010 to 2015 didn't face this task. Neither did anybody else until now. This is a nettle or a poison chalice or a nettle that nobody's wanted to grasp. So when you look at who's on fault for this matter, it's us, all of us. None of us have faced up to it because it's something that none of us have ever wanted to do. We all know what we've got to do, put a damn sight more money in. And I'm speaking from this, and I can speak with quite a lot of passion because I've been a carer. I still work in care on the periphery, but I've been a carer, which means I've done everything from the most intimate personal care on people right through to putting down care plans and organising rotas. So this is something we've all got to look at, we've all got to face. And therefore it's a bit much really to see somebody being blamed or a particular party being blamed for this. We all know what we've got to do on this one. We've got to pay the carers more and give the job a higher status. Because carers, Chairman, they put people's lives are in their hands every single day. They dish out medication, Chairman. They look after people because we don't want to. We, families and other neighbours, don't want to look after people. We don't want to face what we might have to face in the future and become in the future. So I think the carers do a fantastic job. Everybody agrees on that, but we not really want to know what the carers do, what they have to face. And so therefore, Chairman, I can't vote for this. This is very weak. This is just basically Conservative bashing or government bashing. What we need to do is to sit down, all of us together, and work out what is the true plan forward that can help people in Cambridgeshire. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. Councillor Count.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to pick up where Councillor Howell left off, and basically this is a Conservative bashing motion, which is very disappointing because when you look at the entire motion, all it is a litany of complaints of what isn't happening. No effort whatsoever to suggest a way forward or what's better. In fact, the only way I can describe it is, do you remember the Muppets? Do you remember Waldorf and Statler in the Muppets? Always used to shout at what was happening on the stage and complain about them. Well, the stage is yours now. You're actually, the proposer of this motion is the chair of Adults and Social Care, and you actually have to run that element the best you can with the tools at your disposal. But what we're seeing today is the same thing I've seen at committees time and time again. And I call it warming the kettle. What's happening is you're getting your excuses lined up in advance. You're blaming somebody else. It's somebody else's fault because you can't manage. You've blamed the budget £20 million extra went in adult social care from accounts put forward by Councillor Anna Bailey. You've already cut that by £1.5 million. All right? You're blaming the government because there won't be enough money, but actually you have to find a way to manage, all right? And that is your role. You cannot any longer shout from the sidelines and say it's somebody else's fault. And we heard from Councillor Howell about whose problem is this? It is all of our problems. It was Labour's problem under Blair, under Gordon Brown, us with the Liberal Democrats, us on our own, and it hasn't really got to the point where it's fully fixed. So I would have loved if you brought forward a motion where instead of writing to the Secretary of State for Health, ask the Chief Executive to write to the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care to call for a plan which genuinely fixes the crisis on social care. Well, I can see what's going to happen when that gets received. Dear Councillor Howitt, thank you so much for that informative letter and all the suggestions for how to improve things, of which there are none. We will cancel our plans immediately and adopt yours. That's not going to happen, is it? Because there isn't a single positive step, suggestion, move forward. And why isn't there any? Well, I don't know what Councillor Howitt has in mind, or this motion has in mind for improved fixing of the situation, but I did look at the latest edition of the failed Labour Manifesto 2019 to see what their proposals were for it. Page after page of highbrow what we will do. We will make it a better system. It will be great underneath us with virtually no substance whatsoever. But when I did find some substance, Labour. We will ensure no one ever again needs to face catastrophic care costs of more than £100,000 for the care they need. Conservative, a lifetime cap on care costs of £86,000 will be introduced, some £14,000 less. Labour, our plans will more than double the number of people receiving state-funded care. Conservative, the new £100,000 financial assessment limit is over 4 times higher than the current limit of £23,250. So it's unsurprising that we have any suggestions for improvement when the great think tank of the Labour Party has already failed so absolutely to offer up any solutions on a national level, that all we can do is complain at a local level that somebody isn't doing something that you could actually contribute to doing something about. And that's what I'm going to move on to. Your elements of the pact that you all decided to sign up to, which was to pay the real living wage. Well, the government has introduced the national living wage, increased the national living wage up to £9.50 an hour from April. And that's currently the same as the real living wage outside London. But the new real living wage will be announced on November 15th. Your pact, not mine, you want to pay it. But what have you done so far? You voted to pay for it for the directly employed county council staff, and you voted against paying those indirectly paid. And guess where all the social care workers work? Indirectly through a third party. You're already failing in the things you can affect, and yet claiming that you want to do so much. It is just a Conservative bashing motion. Start acting like you're in charge. You've got the votes. Start behaving like leaders and start actually bringing forward actions instead of just complaining about everybody else's.
Thank you for that, Councillor Count. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chairman. I am privileged to be welcomed into the meetings of the Cambridgeshire Care Providers Alliance, and these represent the people who both manage, own and run care homes, but also the agencies who provide domiciliary care, which enables people to stay independently in their own homes with that extra support. And through my conversations and my understanding with them, I absolutely support the principle of this motion and also the nuanced points made by Councillor van der Ven. We're in the situation where we need to take our care providers much more seriously, to value the work that they do and support them, because we have managers who are, as Councillor Count pointed out, running and Councillor Howell organising rotas, but then are routinely having to pick up parts of those rotas themselves because they cannot recruit new staff. They have had adverts in the local job advert pages and through various organisations. They have had people, they have had as many as 10 or 20 people due for interviews who just simply don't turn up because it's easier for them to just put it as a box ticking exercise on their to prove that they're looking for work, but then they don't attend the interviews. And these people are absolutely still delivering the high quality, professional, caring care to these residents and to the people that they look after, even though they're being absolutely run ragged by lack of staff. So we really need to hold the profession in high esteem and recognise what an important role they do, not least, as was also mentioned, in enabling our hospitals to discharge people into safe care packages. So absolutely, I support this motion, and I think what we are asking is that this brings it to the attention of the Secretary of State that we need this to be taken seriously with government funding and a review which genuinely fixes the crisis in social care. I absolutely support this motion, and thank you for bringing it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Netzinger.
Thank you. I hadn't intended to speak on this, and I will be very brief. I can agree with Councillor Howell that successive governments have failed to grasp this issue. My huge concern about what happened in September, and the key at the heart of this motion, is that what happened in September was that Boris Johnson announced that he claimed the rise in the national insurance was to fix the care crisis. And the key point of this motion is that it doesn't, and that is incredibly important. That is a false promise. It is deeply misleading, and misleading the public in that way can be hugely problematic, both for this council and for the public themselves. The public are now expecting that care will be funded and that their homes and assets will be protected. The massive issue here is that this is a misleading claim and that government have not done social care. Social care is not fixed, and we in this room know very well that the crisis is continuing. It is worse this winter than I have ever known it. And that message needs to get out there to people so that they know and understand that this problem continues, it is not fixed. And that is, I think, the most important point about this motion, and why I'm really disappointed that the Conservatives here are not supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Machini.
Thank you very much, Chair. Money indeed. So if you will allow me, I will give a speech in two parts. The theme of which is money. Stop whining about it and get on with it, I hear from Councillor Count. And indeed, you know, the only people that tell people to stop whining about money are the people whose problem it isn't. And I will absolutely take on board Councillor Howell's point. It is a failure of successive governments, not just this latest one, but this latest one is now carrying the can. So they probably really should do. So 7th of September, we get a social care plan announced, which announces funding for the NHS and social care, so yay. However, funding is coming once again from taxing productive labour rather than wealth assets or corporations. That's, by the by, not really a problem for local government. What is the problem for local government? That funding is ring-fenced for the NHS until 2026, at which point the government will have to force what will be portrayed as a cut to the NHS and will be condemned as an unsustainable one at that. Until then, and indeed after then, the burden of financing the adult social care falls on working people through council tax, of which there is a cap at 3% over the medium-term financial strategy, as at the autumn budget, which we have had since then. This is not good enough. We need better, and we won't stop campaigning until we get better. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have no other members indicating that they wish to speak, thankfully, so I shall ask Councillor Howard to sum up, and we will then move to a vote.
Thank you to all members who've contributed. To Councillor Howell, who I know is sincere on these issues and made excellent contributions when he came to the Adults and Health Committee. I take your view seriously. Clearly, the 10 years that the deal not proposals have not been implemented are what I referred to in my opening speech. But I am disappointed that both he and Councillor Count have indicated that Conservatives are choosing to vote against this resolution. It's not a resolution which is blaming their party. It's a resolution that's saying they are in government and they are not doing what they're saying they would do in terms of fixing social care. And when you say it is us who should take responsibility, I accept that. But what more can Cambridgeshire County Council members and officers do when we have such a huge funding gap for our social care? And when that letter goes to the Secretary of State, Councillor Count...
Through the chair, please, Councillor Howard.
Through you, Chair, to the Leader of the Opposition. I hope that what the Secretary of State will say is not just Cambridgeshire County Council and other councils, but independent organisations, including the King's Fund and the Nuffield Trust, all say there is a £7 billion gap in social care this year, let alone the future, £2 billion specifically in shire counties like Cambridgeshire, and to recognise that there is a pressure for the extra funding that at the moment they will not give us. And the cap in the Labour manifesto was on all costs. The cap from the decision on the 7th of September is on care costs only and still leave families like our constituent in Camborne worse off. We do have plans. We do have plans for prevention, for independence and for communities. We are ready and willing and enthusiastic to implement them. But we have to have the funding to enable us to do so. And to be honest, if the past administration had charged the full social care pre-sacked rather than choosing not to do so, we would have more money today. And some humility from the Conservatives on that would be very, very well received. To my colleague, Councillor Bird, you make the very important point that carers are not being helped in this proposal. To Councillor Meskina, you make the very important point that this has to be part of the budget settlement for the authority as a whole. To Councillor Bradnam, you are absolutely right to draw attention to the devastating staff shortages that there are at present, something on a recent survey up to 17% vacancy rates in social care jobs. And every time someone leaves, that's not just a problem of cost and management. It's like a bereavement from the person who receives the social care, to have a different person looking after themselves in such an intimate way. And to the Leader of the Council and to my good colleague and our Vice Chair, Susan van der Ven, they both make the correct point that the problem in social care is, in the Vice Chair's words, Chair, deep-rooted and structural. And it will only be solved by deep-rooted and structural answers. That is not what is provided in the 7th of September announcement, and it is only honest, sticking up for the people of Cambridgeshire in desperate need, that we say so.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. We'll now move to a vote on the motion. All those in favour of the motion, please raise your hands. All those against the motion, please raise your hands. And any abstentions? And the result, Mrs. Rowe?
The result of the vote is 32 votes in favour, 19 against and 2 abstentions. The motion is therefore carried.
Thank you, Mrs. Rowe. It's now 12:30. I suggest that we adjourn for 45 minutes till 1:15 for lunch and re-energising of the frozen bits. So if you could all please be back by 1:15, I would be very appreciative. Colleagues, if you'd like to take your seats, we'll make a start. Right, members, welcome back. I hope you're suitably refreshed. Councillors Slatter and Bradnam, if you'd like to sit down. Right, for those of you who've forgotten, we are in the middle of motions. We're now moving to the fourth motion submitted by Councillor Netzinger. Can I ask Councillor Netzinger to move and speak to a motion that's set out on page 7 of the Council agenda? Councillor Netzinger.
Thank you, Chair. It feels appropriately schoolmastery to be talking about children in this context.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have had a request about speaking into the microphones. Now, it may be that magic has been worked at lunchtime about microphones, but could people, when speaking, please do what they can to lean in, or as I instructed Councillor Maguire, to hunch over?
Chair, I'm slightly wondering whether it might be better for the sound quality if we spoke sitting down.
Well, I just see these traditions all being shot down, and what will our predecessors think? What do I think about this? Right, you can sit, Councillor Netzinger, and we shall sit from now on. But this is only once. It's only once. Councillor Bradnam, yes?
Thank you. You may need to take a motion to give people permission to sit when they speak.
Oh, I think we'll assume that we're sorted. Officers are very happy, so I'm going to leave it at that.
Sometimes in the Constitution, all you've got to do is say, are you agreed?
All right, I shall suspend standing orders with your agreement such that members can sit. Everyone agreed?
Yes.
Thanks you, Councillor Bradnam, for keeping me on the straight and narrow. Now, poor Councillor Netzinger has been itching to get started.
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful to be able to be seated while proposing this motion. And it is also a very important motion, and I think that we need to be taking very seriously the issues for children in Cambridgeshire following the pandemic. The UK is one of the richest countries in the world, and yet 4.3 million children in the UK are growing up in poverty. That's around 1 in 9 children in an average class of 30. But of course, poverty is not spread evenly, and some classrooms in our area, the majority of children may be growing up in families where the basic needs of life, food, shelter, and warmth, are insecure or unreliable. Tackling child poverty was for many years a key priority of government, but in 2016 the Conservative government scrapped the child poverty targets which had been set out in the Child Poverty Act in 2010. Changes to universal credit since 2015 have pushed more and more families into serious poverty. And growing up in poverty has a lifelong impact. Children accessing free school meals are 28% less likely to leave school with 5 good GCSEs than their non-free school meal classmates. As a result, they are less likely to move into further education or higher education and are likely to have lower paid and less secure work. Children from low-income households do not get lower grades because they are less deserving. The daily impact of insecurity puts huge barriers in their way. So, of course, some do manage to overcome the impact of hunger on their ability to concentrate, or the stress of moving school due to insecure or unstable housing. Of course, we all know of examples of amazing or lucky young people who, despite the disadvantages of poverty, were spotted by a local football or swimming club, or whose talents at maths and music are nurtured. But for so many, many young people, the experience of growing up in poverty is that of being shut out from the activities that their friends take for granted. The pandemic has exacerbated the inequalities facing children growing up in poverty. Families with children on free school meals were far less likely to have access to laptops and broadband at home.
Many teachers reported even having to support families with access to paper and pens. Children in poorer families are less likely to have a room of their own to work in and are far more likely to have to share rooms, not only laptops and phones, but also bedrooms with other siblings or family members. And with many poorer children living in cramped multi-generational households, they are also far more likely to have been bereaved as the pandemic hit poorer families disproportionately hard. For all of these reasons, the decision by the Conservative government to cut £20 a week from the incomes of the poorest families at a time of rapidly rising prices is particularly cruel. While the change to the taper rate in universal credit is clearly welcome, many of the poorer families will see little impact from that, as the change does not provide any additional support for those whose income falls below the work allowance, and nor does the change have any impact on young carers who are living with parents on universal credit due to disability. The cruel cut to universal credit must be reversed, especially given the huge rise in the cost of living. And that is why this motion calls on the Secretaries of State to make that change. But we in Cambridgeshire must also do what we can to make sure the most vulnerable children get the support and opportunities they need to thrive. That is why the motion is also calling on this council to set up its own pandemic recovery fund to help ensure children in poverty are helped to access many of the sporting, cultural and social activities that they missed out on so badly during the pandemic years. We will work with partners in all sectors across Cambridgeshire to join us in this goal, because we know that helping the poorest children to catch up after the pandemic is one of the most important actions we can take for Cambridge, for our county's future. So I ask you to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Netzinger. Can I have a seconder, please?
I second, Chairman, and if I could reserve my right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do I have any amendments? In which case, the motion is now open for debate. Speakers, please. Councillor Dr. Boulat.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to say a few words on this topic, as this is something of great concern for my residents in Abbey and was raised with me on many occasions, so hopefully to bring a bit of a local perspective to what is indeed a UK-wide debate on universal credit and support for children and young people. This cut in universal credit affects families up and down the country, but as we have seen with other cuts in welfare throughout time, it does and will continue to exacerbate inequalities in the most deprived parts of the country. Abbey, as you are probably aware, is the most deprived area of Cambridge City. So just to give you an illustration, the life expectancy in Abbey is about 10 years lower than other parts of more wealthier parts of Cambridge City. Now, the local charity in my division in Abbey, called Abbey People, works tirelessly to support families who struggle day to day, from running the local food hub in our division, organizing information sessions, including on welfare support, advising individual families, and really providing this space for the community. It's so important, especially now as we're recovering from the pandemic and we still have many challenges. Now, last year, the charity calculated that there was an over 300% increase in benefit claimants in Abbey, in my division. So we're speaking about a division, a part of the county that has become more and more deprived year on year, at least since 2015. And I spoke to some residents and volunteers, and many are honestly quite afraid to look at the figures for this year when they become ready, because they all know on the ground that life hasn't really got any better for people in Abbey and many parts of the county. And in fact, for many residents, they tell me that life is at its worst, like in the last, compared to the last decade or so. This impact on children and young people that has been highlighted in the motion is deeply, deeply concerning, because on the one hand, perhaps we can think, well, the government thinks it's making some short-term savings on this universal credit, when actually what it does, what making life even more difficult for the poorest in our society does, is to create even more issues in the long term. So, for instance, if children fall behind education, if people develop physical and mental health issues as a result of, to be completely honest, some unacceptable conditions that many of our residents live in. I will just end on this, and I'll be brief on this one, is that when I moved to the UK about 9 years ago, I honestly couldn't have imagined that I would be sat in a council meeting with colleagues across different parties, actually making the case that people shouldn't be forced to choose between turning on their heating, having enough fuel, or having being able to afford a bus ticket or going to Tesco's this week. So this is honestly not what I would have imagined an economy as rich of the UK would do to some of its residents. But here we are, so I'm really glad this gets discussed in the council, and I'm supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cox-Condren.
Thank you. I also welcome and support this motion. And we hear about food poverty, fuel poverty, digital poverty, but it is poverty, isn't it? It is widespread, entrenched poverty affecting thousands of families, as we will have all seen, and the devastation and impact that that has across Cambridgeshire. As a self-employed lone parent, I have, had periods where I've been completely dependent on handouts of clothes and food to support my family. So I can certainly say I understand the impact of losing £20 a week. And as a slight aside, saying in Abbey, I'm an Abbey resident, and when I was pregnant with and single with my first son, local residents who had very little made a collection for me so that I had clothes for him. That is the sort of, those are the communities that we're talking about. Anyway, that was a slight diversion. More and more, the arts and sports are being pushed out of our schools. And as an arts facilitator, working for equality and social justice, I've worked with children across Cambridgeshire for many years, here in St Ives, Cambridge, Wisbech, Ramsey, Chatteris March, Ely, Whittlesea, working with children and families struggling to access the arts and culture, working in after-school clubs and community groups. Often young people that we refer to as hard to reach, but actually more and more it is hard to reach arts and it is hard to reach culture. The arts and culture is a critical part of a young person's life for self-expression, empathy, improving metacognition, collaborative working, understanding potential and learning new skills, building social and cultural capital, connecting to a place and to each other, and a better awareness of what our homes, towns and natural environment have to offer. It gives us a voice, it increases democracy and it strengthens us. So I attended an all-parliamentary party group meeting about arts and culture last week, and it was devastating to hear yet again about the impact of exclusion to the arts for so many of our children and families, but also really heartening to hear MPs from all parties talking about the social and economic importance of arts and culture. And poverty excludes us for many reasons. It impacts on our time, on our health, on our stress, and our feeling of belonging in any way. So I welcome this call to support access to after-school clubs financially, but also stress that we will also be working at Cosmic alongside officers and partners and communities to support and ensure that these after-school opportunities are welcoming, equitable and supportive. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. I support the motion put forward by my colleague, Councillor Netzinger, today, and I just wanted to add a few points about the need and the budget. The proposal is a compassionate and considered response to the difficulties experienced by the poorest families in Cambridgeshire, difficulties which have been compounded by changes to the universal credit benefit proposed by the Chancellor in the recent budget. As we know, the Chancellor removed the £20 a week uplift which had been introduced 18 months previously. In doing so, he took £6 billion worth of annual expenditure out of the budget. However, he then restored £2 billion of that cut. Good news for poor families? Not for the poorest, not at all. The restored funding was targeted on families in work, allowing more to claim and to keep more of the money they earned from work. The IFS yesterday estimated that the number of families claiming universal credit will now rise from 4 million to 7 million families. Well, it is obviously welcome that more people are able to get support. None of it helps the poorest families who have simply seen a cut of £1,000 and £40 per year in their income. But it is worse than that. As Nick Timmins of the Institute for Government and others have pointed out, inflation and sharp increases in fuel bills and the cost of food means that funding they receive will buy less and less. The inescapable conclusion is that many of the poorest families in Cambridgeshire face a very hard winter indeed. It is essential to provide help and support for children in those families most affected. I therefore wholeheartedly support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Goodliffe.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a few observations which I've seen in the days since the recent reduction in universal credit. In one school, a mother was in tears, for they'd found the fee and the necessary clothing and equipment so that her child could attend an after-school club. She said, "It's the only thing that he manages to do. It's the only thing he gets to out of school. He's desperate to stay. Thank you, thank you, thank you." Another school took to social media to ask for donations of winter coats for their students who were attending in the cold. And food banks, fridges and food share centres across the county and elsewhere are inundated with requests for food which doesn't require much cooking, and indeed requests for fuel cards. We may comment today on the lack of warmth in this building. However, how many of our families are facing that for the entirety of winter and facing the lack of fuel to feed their families, even if they had the food in the cupboards to do so? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick points. In the October half term of last year, I stepped up in my town and ran a Food for Children campaign. All week at the football club, we fed anybody that came through the door. We're very, very aware of this. We did it through working with partners. We work with partners, and I welcome the first part of this that says working with partners. Am I really to believe that we didn't, even though we voted for it, have the word partners on the end of a committee so that we could make it spell cosmic? Is that really the reason? Because we've thrown to the left side the use of working with partners, and then suddenly we brought up the word partners in here again. But this is exactly what community action is all about, working with partners. I'm very proud to belong to the group of people in our village that have been working since the pandemic, right through the pandemic, helping those most in need, and will continue to do so. But I'm afraid I can't support the second part of this. We're going to wear our poor CEO out writing and writing and writing to letters that basically don't get anywhere. What's the actions of the administration on this? I welcome the first one, but the second one, it just doesn't quite work.
Thank you for that, Councillor Goldsack. Did I see somebody indicating to speak? Councillor Count. It wasn't you, I hasten to add, but now that you have, the floor is yours.
I don't know if you can hear me. You normally can. I prefer it this way. Let me know if you can't, and I'll be forced to sit down. But yeah, there's some valid points here which I support, but others I have difficulty with. In particular, the recommendation be to oppose halting the temporary uplift in universal credit. Singling that out on its own does not fully reflect what happened at government level with all of the comprehensive changes that were made. The taper relief was made in the introduction, minimum wage was another, analysis was another. And after all, this was a coronavirus related temporary increase. So that particular bit I don't support, and I'm actually quite upset, a little bit like Councillor Goldsack has just said. Once again, we've got the administration who are able to do something, spending all their time complaining about what others don't do, instead of concentrating on something that they can do, which for me is the good part about this motion. So I do wish that we'd had more talk on that in the introduction and from the debate than that. Because I quite like the idea of a scheme that helps reduce cost out of school activities for those that are in the most difficult positions, because it is for many a luxury in life that would be difficult for them to afford, and yet we do realise that would make a difference with themselves. Now, I do wish that when this motion came forward, perhaps there was some more work went in, because the part about it that one part that I'm not really happy with. Work with partners to set up a funding scheme, Now, one of the beauties of a motion to full council is you can actually introduce some money into the thing. You could say, let's kickstart this with £10,000, £50,000, £500,000. But you could have kick-started this with something. And I feel that this set up a scheme to work with partners, how we're going to do this, without any effort from the county council in some element of funding. Where's the rest going to come from? Is this going to be a Liberal Democrat headline that, like a poor firework, looks great when you buy it, but actually fizzles out when you try and use it? So I'd like to support it, but I'd like to see it turn into actions and not just fizzle out. So whilst I'd like to try and support that element of an unfinished and incomplete motion, school activities, out-of-school activities are one of the tools in the box in the levelling up agenda. And my own area is one of those in an area of multiple deprivation, and we all recognise that it is a widespread, but Finland is recognised as having the most deprived areas. And it's also a very rural area. And whilst we concentrate on children going to an out-of-school club, and we've heard a great story just then where the clothing and the actual tools of the activity were purchased, what we haven't mentioned is how you get there and back. Because the one thing you can't do in a rural area, you can't consider the out-of-schools activity club if you can't get your child there and back. So whatever you're doing with your work with the partners, and at some point in time you'll think about putting some money in, or not, you may have a different scheme up in reserve. But one element that I really hope that you'll take on board is that when you're looking for how to deliver extra help to get out to school activities, you consider equity of access, and equity of access for those in rural communities and not those just in the larger urban areas like Cambridgeshire that would find it quite easy to get to and from an area. So summing up for the negative and positive reasons I've set out, I wish you well in one element of that, but because of the 20 million, so because of the change to the universal credit recommendation, I'm forced to abstain on this one. But I do wish you well in the areas under our control. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Count. Councillor Dew.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat what Councillor Count just said because I totally agree with him. If this had come as two motions, I'd be quite happy to support the first part. In fact, I'm really looking forward to, if this goes through today, working with it. I presume it will go to Cosmic, and that's where we'll be picking it up and actually working it and turning it into something real that happens on the ground. As I say, I think it's a bit of a shame that it's got tangled in with some political shenanigans, and I accept the fact that it happens. But I think, like Councillor Count, if it came on its own, I'd be happy to support the whole lot. My message to you is I'm quite happy with the first part, and I look forward to seeing something really useful happen. Take the message on board that it's not enough to have high-level aspirations. We've got to find the money, look at the strategic things that get in the way, i.e. how do the children get there and back, and issues like that. So I think, that part of the motion is a really good starting point. It's not the end, but it's a good starting point. And then we need to quite quickly identify who these other funding partners are going to be and how we're going to get to them. But as I say, I'll be abstaining reluctantly because I really want to support the first part, but I can't put my name to the second. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have no other speakers, so Councillor Machini, you reserved your right to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I've got to say, now I'm speaking sitting down. It's a lot easier to speak in the microphone, but my experience of being in the classroom and sitting on an exam is now complete. So I will address the honourable teachers. I promised a two-part speech on finances and money, and I will deliver that very shortly. But before I do so, it is indeed a very lucky coincidence that the committee name spells cosmic. I promise we weren't going for that, and we only noticed after. But, do we really only work with partners on that committee? Of course not. We work with partners across the board, in every single committee, in every single working group, everything that we do. We have to work with our partners. So that's at the very, very heart of what we are doing. And while I absolutely welcome the challenge, put meat on these bones, go on and do this, we absolutely shall. And I am sure that Cosmic will live up to its name on that. In terms of the rest of the speech, we have got a real problem at the moment because working families' finances are being squeezed from all sides. National insurance is up, universal credit is down, inflation is up, fuel costs are up, and as the motion states, eligibility criteria for free school meals aren't becoming any more generous as a result. We welcome the reissue of the winter grant, which we were able to put to such good use last year, for which credit is due where it is due, and I compliment the previous administration for what we were able to do with the winter grant. But we wonder at which point the government is going to stop this vicious cycle of squeezing working families only then to come out with a dollop of cash and be praised for its generosity. The squeeze is forever, and the dollop is once. This is no way to budget, and it is no way to force our families to live. And I will therefore conclude with the same words I used when I was speaking to Councillor Howitt's motion. We need better, and we will not stop campaigning until we get it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And finally, Councillor Netzinger to sum up.
Thank you. I don't have much to add. I'm very grateful for all the support that has been expressed for this motion. It is a shame that the opposition party is not able to support it. And I do slightly object to being lectured on the importance of public transport by the group that cut bus subsidies year after year. But it is a point, it is a very important point that without the transport to be able to access these activities, children will still be disadvantaged. And it is something that we will certainly be looking at on the combined authority and when we come to look at bus transport more seriously. Thank you.
Splendid. I will now take a vote on the motion. All those in favour of the motion, please raise your hands. All those against, please raise your hands. And any abstentions, please raise your hands.
Chair, the result of the vote is 33 votes in favour, none against and 19 abstentions. The motion is therefore carried.
Thank you, Mrs Rowe. That concludes discussion of the fourth motion. We now move to the fifth and last motion submitted by Councillor Dupre. Can I ask Councillor Dupre to move and speak to her motion as set out on pages 8 and 9 of the Council agenda?
Thank you very much indeed. I'm probably one of the few members that it doesn't really matter whether I stand up or sit down, but there we go. I'll go for it. It's a truism that land is a limited resource, and there's a huge demand on that resource, nowhere more so than here in Cambridgeshire. We need homes to accommodate our population and premises for people to work and study. We need land for transport purposes, for food production, for nature and biodiversity, for water, for energy generation, for leisure. We're faced with pressure from the government's Oxfam ARC. We have significant social and economic inequalities. We're one of the most biodiversity deprived counties in the country. We're particularly vulnerable to climate change. We have areas of the county that are at serious flood risk and areas where water scarcity is a major problem. We're grappling with huge numbers of national strategic infrastructure project applications for transport, waste, energy and water. We're a major contributor to the nation's food supply, and there isn't any organisation I can think of that hasn't got at least one major project planned for the Fens. All these uses currently compete. Different private and public bodies develop their own plans and initiate their own proposals in isolation from each other, when a more collaborative approach could enable land to deliver multiple social, economic and environmental benefits. For several years on this council, I've been pondering this question. How do we reach a collective decision on the best use of land? Agriculture or solar panels? Food or biofuel? Housing or nature? How can we ensure the best use of land while ensuring that all the purposes for which we need land are achieved? That's why the proposal by the Food Farming and Countryside Commission is so significant, and why the potential to pilot it here in Cambridgeshire is so relevant and so exciting. The aim of the pilot is to develop a set of principles agreed across agencies and to bring together the main agencies and partners, sorry I used that word again, partners, to design, advise and lead on this process. The framework would have no statutory force, but would guide decision-making with the aim of ensuring the best use for each area of land. It would inform local plans and strategies and enable us to achieve our environmental and other objectives. Early in September, I attended an initial event at Emmanuel College, Cambridge, where the former master, Dame Fiona Reynolds, is a key champion of this piece of work. It included civil servants, councillors and council officers, utility companies, developers, farmers, third sector representatives and more. We all saw the benefits of this approach and are meeting again later this month to consider next steps in bringing this project to life. I believe that Cambridgeshire County Council needs to be at that table, supporting this initiative and engaging with partners to enable it to progress and ensuring that in that process the voices of all our residents are heard. That's why I brought this motion here today, and I urge members across the chamber to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. Can I have a seconder, please?
Seconded, and I reserve my right.
Who's sorry? Councillor Gay. Thank you. Do I have any amendments? In that case, the motion is now open for debate. Who's going to kick off? Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm also fortunate in that I've worked my working life in agriculture, and I continue to do so in a freelance capacity. And so I'm aware of the conflicting constraints, but also the needs that we have around our land. And I'm very encouraged to see that Baroness Young has been looking at the land use framework and in the House of Lords debate, and has been talking about the fact that we need to be setting broad frameworks that would give local communities, people and landowners more security in making decisions about their land for the future. And this is the point. Our residents live and work in and on this land, and they work it. You know, they are intimately boots on the ground with mud on their feet and stock that live on it. And they need security to plan investments for their own future and for their families. So we have to ensure that the landowners feel involved in the discussions about the use in future of the land. And it's nuts and bolts stuff. We, as Councillor Dupre has pointed out, there are many needs for our land. We need, certainly locally, we need more land for carbon sequestration, for food production, increasing food security, for tree planting, to halt the reverse in decline in biodiversity. We need green space, and we also need an increased place for housing, because in order to keep our countryside in good heart, we need to enable our young people to be able to continue to live and work in the countryside, and that means they need homes too. So with all of this, we must ensure that we involve our communities in that decision making, as well as those expert bodies who have a professional view and understanding of our whole region. This is to do with water sufficiency as well as the risk of flooding. And we absolutely must engage all of these bodies in a strategic planning for what we want to do with our land, whether it's protecting our chalk streams, or whether it's ensuring we continue to have enough food from our rich fenland soil. So absolutely, this motion seeks to enable coordinated thinking about the land, accommodating all the bodies who have expertise in the technical issues, and of course involving landowners. So I heartily endorse the motion for this land use framework for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bratnam. Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chairman. I read with interest the motion, then I went away and researched it as the right thing to do. I looked at the content by looking at the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission, an independent think tank looking at these areas. I really needn't have bothered, because basically this motion says exactly what it says on their website, word for word, but in a slightly different order. Now, lots of it is very good stuff, but are we, the people of Cambridgeshire, to understand that this motion is something that's eagerly considered for the benefit of our residents, or is it something else? I'm afraid I think this not to be the most critical decision before us today. Or could it be that actually we only get 5 motions at full council, so let's fill them up and stop those horrible people coming in with another one? Let me point out a few aspects of the motion to make my point. At Strategy and Resources meeting last week, we discussed the replacement of a farm's estate property at taxpayers' expense that carried a budget of 450k for a 112 metre squared bungalow. The only place that this was discussed was at S&R. I put forward and had agreed by the chair of that committee and the leader of the coalition that it's totally wrong for our amazing farms estates to not have a member focus on it that it deserves. That was agreed. This motion doesn't mention the 32,000 acres that we hold, the 200 plus tenant farmers that toil this land. Interestingly, I heard Councillor Bradnam say that. Toil this land in and around Cambridge. In fact, it implies that it could even ignore the knowledge, selecting to listen to others and not even earning a toil in Cambridge. Furthermore, we have ongoing contracts with our farm tenancy partners, and I know officers are working very closely with the tenants as we await the outcome on Elms, which is to replace the old EU subsidy approach with an environmental land management system. These contacts could well be impacted by adoption of this motion, creating so much unnecessary additional work to an already stretched officer team. On another point that was raised, that all the answers are in land. In July, I brought a motion forward to say no to Seneca, an overbearing and now thought to be non-viable 25-year project that will not produce carbon neutrality. And this has taken 3,000 acres of rich farmland out, which was voted down and watered down. Land is our most valuable asset, from farming for healthy food and enabling carbon sequestration to supporting habitat creation. A large part of the solution to these crises is to be found on the land. That's from the website. This is the same land that the members of the administration shouted, if it's solar, it's green, not thinking about the monoculture that such solar farms produce, the long-term damage, the ability to facilitate multifunctionality to use this land to its full potential. I'm taking those words from this website. So how come nowhere in this motion does it state that it will speak with, consult with, work with our partners who take on our tenancies and are at the forefront of our land, our partner experts who are at the forefront of each crisis that the food, farming and countryside land use framework purports to cover? I think we're getting an indication as to why. In my opinion, this motion is nothing more than the opportunity to fill the motion quota with virtue signalling complicated sounding words that make the administration look very smart, when in fact it has disregarded our farming partners, our farming community and the very land that we own. The statement that it wants to bring such people together should be normal business, everyday farms management group business, and not come from the well-meaning independent Quango type body that means well but has really no teeth. What does the NFU think about this? What does the large farming conglomerates that work in our county think about this and employ many people? And it's closer to home, what does the tenant farmer base think about this? The 4 points of undertaking as the requests are all very well-meaning, all very good. But should we also have a debate on the colour of bathroom towels, the temperature of coffee machines, or when we're speaking to fellow employees? I'm sorry for the time this motion has taken, for the officers involved, and for the fact that no one's bothered to speak to our tenant farmers. For these reasons, I shall not be supporting the motion because I believe it is not a council matter to decide, nor is it good practice to seek approval for such matters. Motions for changes to council activity, proposals to a new way forward, not for the good practice enhancements that someone has read on a web and thought that will make us look good. This leaves me feeling like a Roman watching Nero play the fiddle while the city around me burnt. Members of the administration, the residents of Cambridgeshire deserve better. You've been called out on this motion. I think it's time now for you to actually ask yourselves, was this really what you were elected for? And I'm so glad that in a place that holds comedy venues, I've made a few people smile. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Councillor Goldsack. I have nobody else who has Councillor Count. Please don't feel shy about putting your hands up. I like to look forward to people.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very much along the same lines as Councillor Goldsack, because this cut and paste lazy motion that says a lot, achieves little and interferes in everything. I have a number of points that I take issue with. And the first is nanny state politics. This comes from a basic misunderstanding of what happens in the real world. But what you want to do is tell everybody from every facet of life that you know best, getting embroiled in decision making that has little to do with you, but you can't trust others, no matter how qualified, to make decisions without your interfering hand being in there. You now want a hand in influencing planning decisions, transport decisions, environmental decisions, because the starting point of this land use framework would start from the presumption of trying to ensure the best use for each and every area of land, as if you know best. So you can't trust the planning authorities to look at flood plans, local transport plans, or environmental surveys and policies to decide where best to build. You can't trust the combined authority to use that information, big data, traffic surveys, to decide what transport goes where. And you can't trust farmers to be environmentally sensitive when their income, future and livelihood depends on getting it right. You say this is because these people work independently and don't talk to each other. The fact of the matter, they do, and there's lots of systems built in for that. The second issue that Councillor Goldsack's already mentioned is the County Council is the landlord of a 32,000 acre farm estate. You haven't even set up an appropriate oversight for this asset through a service committee, but you've already decided that you should be a key influencer in land use inside the whole of Cambridgeshire. Issue number 3, setting yourselves up as the custodians of the future when you already mess up on day-to-day decisions in here and now. I've mentioned it earlier, strategy and resources. You were presented with an option of digging up fossil fuels, burning them and putting 5,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent into the atmosphere, or for £53.65 a tonne, choosing not to increase the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere at all. And despite all of your well-publicised aims of being green and not wanting what is good for the planet, you have proved yourselves to repeatedly be all talk and no trousers. Issue number 4, why us, why now? If you really believed in this, and I suspect you don't, but it makes you sound good, why didn't you raise it with the combined authority for them to take forward? Your leader, Councillor Netzinger, has a place on the board. She could have suggested it. I know the fear and ridicule of being turned down may be real, but it was still a viable option. So why should you go there instead of leading from the County Council and inviting the combined authority to join you on this? Of course, you don't trust the fact that it's a Labour mayor. The Independent Climate Commission would be a more logical starting point. Of course, you won't go back to them because that's issue number 1, you can't trust them. And issue number 5, which is probably the biggest one, and this is personal and comes from a place of mistrust. I don't want you involved in deciding what is best land use for those of us that live in Fenland. You have a history of trying to force the Fens biosphere on us, irrespective of local wishes which you ignore. And you also hold an overwhelming desire to re-wet the Fens. I know that you don't like me debating with you on this council chamber, but I do think flooding an entire area just to get rid of me is a little bit excessive. So I can't support this. It's delusional and it's not a genuine attempt to improve the lives of the people in Cambridgeshire.
Thank you, Councillor Count. Can I remind you, please, to address remarks through the chair?
My apologies, Chair, all that 5 minutes through you.
Thank you. I don't want to think about the no trousers bit, if that's all right. I don't have any other members who have indicated they wish to speak. Councillor Gay, now is your moment.
Thank you, Chair. Contrary to what Councillors Goldsack and Count claim, the importance and urgency of this issue is crystallised by the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission. They say Cambridgeshire exemplifies the challenges faced in planning for everyone's long-term benefit, not just the farmers. It is a large county with much to be proud of. Yet this comes with significant challenges, intense development pressures in the south and west of the county, but underinvestment in the north. Major social and economic inequalities across the county, some struggling market towns, a degraded natural environment, eroding fenland soils, poor connections between rural and urban areas, and pressures for development in parts of the county that are challenging our natural resource base, especially water. This is the position that we have come to after 50 years of Tory control of Cambridgeshire County Council. What we can do now is to take the first step to addressing these problems and instituting a strategic rather than piecemeal approach to land use by supporting this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Gay. And finally, Councillor Dupre, to sum up, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. It's been certainly a different debate than the one I thought might have been had, and I'm grateful for Councillor Bradnam's comments and also those of Councillor Gay in seconding and his recognition of the urgency of this issue. I try not to be too surprised by what the opposition is going to do, but I confess my utter astonishment at what I've just heard from them. We're being told that this matter is so unimportant that it shouldn't have used up the pages in the agenda. I can think of nothing more important than making those critical decisions about the best use of land in Cambridgeshire when we are faced with the multiplicity of pressures, challenges and issues. I find it utterly astonishing to be told by Councillor Count that to be criticised by Councillor Count for wanting a hand in influencing environmental decisions. Too damn right I want us to be influencing environmental decisions. The environment is absolutely at the forefront of our joint administration agreement. It's at the forefront of our priorities. We have, as has been pointed out by the Conservative group, we have county farms estates, we have country parks, we have huge areas of land for which we are directly responsible, as well as whole areas of life for which we have overall responsibility in other ways other than as landowners. Absolutely, I want to be there at the table with people influencing environmental decisions. And I'm also astonished that Councillor Count suggests that he doesn't want the council to be a key influencer. We should be a key influencer. We must be. Not just through our county farms estate, but also, as I've said, a key influencer in the areas of biodiversity, environment, responding to those national strategic infrastructure project applications, influencing growth, public health, all of those things. They're so desperately important. And I'm astonished that the Conservative group thinks we should simply pull out and let others get on with it. Absolutely astonished. One of the great joys, I think, of going to the first meeting, and indeed of taking on this role more generally, has been to meet so many farmers who are so, not just enthusiastic, but evangelistic about the work they do and the contribution that their work can make in all sorts of areas, not just environmental, important though that is, but at the first meeting, I was sitting next to a farmer who had previously been a GP, who was absolutely passionate about the link between farming, food and health. And these people, these farmers, absolutely want to be involved in this at that table, influencing the decisions. The enthusiasm in the room was palpable. I was going to say I wish that members of the opposition had actually been in that room to see it, but I think they might have just so damaged the tone that it would have been a real disappointment. It was a fantastic meeting, full of people really committed to work together to address one of the most important issues facing our community and our county. And I just feel that people in Fenland are so let down by their representatives. They're represented by people who have no interest at all in seeing the council take an active involvement in all of these important issues. They're represented by people who don't believe in climate change. They're represented by people who are anti-vaxxers, anti-maskers, anti-jabbers, anti-health in one of the most health-deprived parts of the county. Every day, in every way, people in Finland who face huge challenges from inequality of all kinds are let down day by day by day by the people who represent them, and you should be ashamed. I really hope that some of you, even so, will support this motion today and give us, as a council, the backing that we need to go back into those meetings later on this month and in the future and work with our partners to address these really significant issues.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. I will now take a vote on the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those against, please raise your hands. Any abstentions? Mrs. Rowe?
Chair, the result of the vote is 32 votes in favour, 20 against, no abstentions. The motion is therefore carried.
Thank you. That concludes discussion of the motions. Next, we consider agenda item 11A, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority and Overview and Scrutiny Committee oral questions, which will be dealt with in accordance with the protocol set out in Annex 1 of Part 4.1 Council Procedure Rules of the Council's Constitution, which I know you have all read. The generic report summarising the decisions made by the combined authorities' formal committees is included on the Council agenda on pages 85 to 127. Could you please raise your hand if you wish to ask a question of Councillor Netzinger, the Council's appointee on the board? You will have 2 minutes in which to ask a question and 1 for a supplementary, with up to a maximum of 2 minutes for a direct oral response to each. Nobody? In which case, we move on. Could you please raise your hand if you wish to ask a question of Councillors Beckett and Gulsack, the Council's appointees on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Again, you have 2 minutes in which to ask a question and 1 for a supplementary, with up to a maximum of 2 minutes for a direct oral response to each.
Sorry, Chair, those aren't the correct councillors.
Oh, where was that voice came from where? Councillor Atkins. I'm reading, as you probably guess, a note.
I believe Councillors Goldsack and myself are the councillors on the Combined Authority Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
There's an excess of young men in the council nowadays. It's confusing us all. So I hope somebody has a question for at least Councillor Atkins after all of that.
Chair, please. Excess of young councillors, really?
Councillor Milnes, are you feeling left out?
Not
all right, let's move on quickly. We move now to item B, questions on the Fire Authority. I propose to take questions on Fire Authority issues. This will be dealt with in accordance with the guidelines agreed by the Council. The report from the Fire Authority is included on the Council agenda on pages 128 to 130. Councillor Edna Murphy, the Chair of the Fire Authority, will respond to any questions on behalf of the Fire Authority. Other members of the Fire Authority are welcome to comment if they wish. Anybody? Councillor Bradnam.
I'm just being naughty here. I want to ask what a hot debrief is. Page 128, 2.1.
Councillor Murphy, could you share with Council what a hot debrief is, please? Or would you rather discuss it with Councillor Bradnam outside the meeting?
I'll venture an
Splendid.
explanation, if I may, Chair. Yes, it probably sounds a bit more exciting when it's put that way than the reality. The slightly boring fact is that it's an informal briefing following the inspection, and it is to an opportunity to, without giving a full view of the inspection, but it's an opportunity to raise any critical matters and matters of concern that really can't wait until the final report is out. People need to know if there's something seriously wrong. And I'm delighted to say that not only was there nothing highlighted, there was nothing wrong, but also there were many positive points.
Splendid, thank you. Any other questions for the Fire Authority? In which case we move on to item C, which is written questions under Council Procedure Rule 9.2. 4 questions were notified by the deadline, and the responses have been copied to members already. So we now move back to agenda item 6, which, as you know, I deferred so that we could move into confidential session. So I move that the press and public be excluded from the meeting during the consideration of the following report on the grounds that it is likely to involve the disclosure of exempt information under paragraph 1 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed as it refers to information relating to any individual. After the motion to exclude has been put, the streaming of this meeting of the Council's YouTube channel will stop. But perhaps I could say thank you to those members of the public who have been watching. So I am now going to suspend just for a couple of minutes while the chamber is made secure and the streaming is stopped before I call on the chair of the Staffing Appeals Committee to speak.